Welcome, traveler. Before we begin our journey backward in time, I want you to take a moment, a long, deep, steady breath, and simply let go of whatever the day has demanded of you. As you settle into your space, I invite you to dim the lights, adjust your blankets, and allow your posture to lose its hard edges, to soften and lose its tension. We are about to step out of the frantic current of the modern world, to turn off the bright screens and loud noises of today, and tune into a quieter frequency, one that belongs only to you and to the past. Make yourself perfectly comfortable, tune out the world, and just relax. Imagine, if you will, the simple, predictable rhythm of a life you once took entirely for granted. You are standing near low stone wall, somewhere in the wide, sun-drenched alluvial plains outside Susa, or perhaps along the banks of the Karen River, where the mud is thick and dark, and the air always smells faintly of river silt, crushed wild thyme, and drying barley straw. The year is 481 before the Common Era, and the sun is beginning its slow, honey-colored descent behind the Zagros Mountains, casting shadows that stretch out long and blue across the fields. You are not a warrior. You have never held a bronze sword. You have never stood in a battle line. And the furthest you have ever traveled from your mud brick home is 3 days' walk down the trade path to sell surplus onions and raw wool at the district market. And yet, on this particular afternoon, as the cicadas begin their rhythmic buzzing in the reed beds, a horseman arrives. He does not ride fast. He does not shout. He simply trots his horse into the village square, his leather saddle bag creaking with every step. He carries a roll of papyrus tied with string, stamped with the royal seal of the Achaemenid King of Kings. The village elder steps forward, bowing low, his forehead almost touching the dry earth. The horseman unrolls the scroll and reads, not with passion, but with the monotonous, weary voice of a clerk who has read these exact words in 50 villages before yours. The great king, Xerxes, son of Darius, king of nations, king of this vast earth, has decreed a gathering. Every satrapy, every province, every family that holds a plot of land under the king's peace, must yield its sons. You do not get to say no. The concept of choice, in the empire of the King of Kings, is not something that extends down to someone who works a wooden plow. By the time the moon rises over the palm trees, your wife or mother has packed you a cloth bundle. Inside are 3 flat cakes of hard barley bread, a small leather pouch of dried saltfish, a wooden comb, and a second pair of woolen leather sandals that you have been saving for winter. You look at your home one last time in the silver moonlight, the cool evening breeze blowing through the doorway, and you step out onto the date road, joining 4 other men from your village. None of you speak. The silence is heavy, broken only by the crunch of your sandals on dry gravel, and the distant barking of a village dog that does not know you are never coming back. For 3 weeks, you march westward toward the great royal city, joining larger and larger streams of men along the royal road. What began as 5 men from your village soon becomes 50, then 500, then 5,000. You become part of a human river, moving slowly, relentlessly, across dusty plains and stony hills. The dust, that is the first thing that stays with you. It settles in your hair. It coats your eyelashes with a fine gray powder. It tastes of lime and old earth. And no matter how often you cough or drink from your leather water skin, the taste of the road never leaves your tongue. The sun beats down with a dry, relentless heat. And by noon every day, your tunic is stiff with white salt rings from your sweat. When you finally arrive at the assembly grounds near the royal city, the sheer scale of what you are seeing is almost impossible for your mind to comprehend. You have lived your entire life in a village of 80 people, perhaps seeing 200 at the annual regional festival. But hey, stretched across the plain as far as the eye can see, is a sprawling city of tents, banners, fires, and livestock. There are tents of dyed wool, tents of rough goat hair, leather lean-tos, and simple brushwood shelters. The air above the camp is thick with a pale blue haze of smoke from tens of thousands of small cook fires, smelling of burning camel dung, roasting mutton fat, green wood, and cumin. The sound is a constant, low, thunderous hum, like a swarm of bees the size of a mountain. You are assigned to a camp sector based on your language, or at least, what the royal scribes think your language sounds like. And this is where the overwhelming confusion of the empire first hits you. You speak a dialect of Elamite, but the men pitched in the tent next to yours are Scythians, who wear tunic-like garments and speak a tongue that sounds like rattling stones. Beyond them are the Medes, proud men in long trousers and embroidered tunics. And further down the line are men from the eastern satrapies, Bactrians in rough wool hats, succor horsemen with tall, pointed felt caps that make them look like giant black cones against the sky, and Paphlagonians with plaited leather helmets that look like woven baskets. You cannot speak to 9 out of 10 men you pass. You communicate in gestures, pointing at water jars, nodding, or shrugging when the orders shouted by imperial officers sound like gibberish. On your 3rd day in the camp, you are summoned to the army tent, a long structure of heavy canvas guarded by 2 Persian officers wearing polished bronze helmets shaped like pointed eggs. Hey, you receive your issue of equipment. You had hoped, perhaps in your naive village dreams, that you might be handed a suit of gleaming bronze armor, like the noble horsemen who guard the satrap. Instead, you are handed a shield, called a geryon. It is not made of wood, nor bronze, nor iron. It is woven from dried willow twigs and reeds, covered in a layer of thin, raw hide that smells strongly of tanning lye and old cow. It is light, surprisingly light, which feels like a blessing when you imagine carrying it for 300 leagues. But as you press your hand against the center of it, you realize the willow bends under the weight of your own thumb. Next, they hand you a spey. It is roughly 6 feet long, made of slender ash wood that feels slightly rough under your fingers. The point is small, a bronze leaf shaped no longer than your hand, secured to the shaft with a simple iron rivet. You are also given a short dagger, or achaemenid, tucked into a leather sheath that hangs from a hemp rope belt. For your head, there is no iron cap, no bronze helm. You are told to wear your own cloth turban, or you are given a soft, padded felt cap, called a tiara, that folds forward over your brow. It shields your neck from the burning sun. Yes, but against a blow from an axe or a bronze blade. It offers no more protection than a wet napkin. You look down at yourself, dressed in a linen tunic, leather sandals, holding a wicker basket and a long stick. And you realize, you are not a knight. You are filler. And then, one morning before dawn, the horns sound. Not bronze trumpets as you might imagine, but giant, hollowed bull horns that produce a low, terrifying moan, echoing across the encampment like the cry of a dying leviathan. The grand march begins. You are ordered into formation. 10 men wide, 100 men deep. You do not know where you are going. No one tells a Levi where he is marching. You only know that you must keep the heels of the man in front of you in sight. If you fall out of line, the mounted Persian officers, riding heavy horses with leather chest armor, carry long whips made of braided bull hide. They do not hesitate to strike. The crack of the whip over the heads of the marching column is a sound that soon becomes as familiar as the beating of your own heart. As your division turns onto the broad royal road heading northwest towards Sardis, you catch your first glimpse of the king's personal guard, the Immortals, 10,000 men, marching in flawless, synchronized symmetry. They do not look like the rest of you. Their tunics are rich purple and crimson, woven with gold thread that glints dazzled in the sun. Under their tunics, you can see the glint of steel scale armor, overlapping like the scales of a great river fish. Their spears are longer, heavier, tipped at the wooden butt end with small, solid silver pomegranates. When they step, the silver pomegranates tap against their leather greaves in a rhythmic, icy time. Clink, clink, clink. They march with an eerie, silent pride, ignoring the thousands of dusty levies watching them from the roadside. They are the elite, the king's shadow, and you are merely the dust they walk upon. The daily routine of the march is a grinding, monotonous test of human endurance. You wake 2 hours before dawn, when the night air is so cold that your fingers are stiff and blue. The camp cooks, assigned one to every 100 men, hand out the morning ration. It is a single, dense cup of barley meal, mixed with lukewarm water and a pinch of salt, sometimes stirred into a thick, cool porridge, sometimes baked over flat stones into a tough, unleavened cake that tastes of smoke and grit. If you are lucky, there's a small thumb of garlic or a dried fig to sweeten the bitter grain. You eat quickly, sitting on your bundle, watching the stars overhead begin to fade into pale silver. Then, the marching begins. 20 miles, day after day, week after week. Your feet, even inside thick leather sandals, begin to blister. The blisters form, burst, and fill with gray road dust, until your soles are leathered, cracked, and numb. The heat of midday in Asia Minor is oppressive. The sun sits heavy on your head like a brass plate. Your wicker shield, which felt so light at Susa, now feels like a slab of oak dragging down your left shoulder. The strap cuts into your collarbone, wearing away the skin until the cloth of your tunic sticks to raw wounds. Water is strictly rationed. Each unit carries leather water skins on baggage mules that trudge in the center of the column. But the water, by afternoon, is hot, tasting of old goat grease and tannic pitch used to seal the seams. You take a small sip, holding it in your mouth to wet your swollen tongue before swallowing. Then, the marching begins. 20 miles, day after day, week after week. Your feet, even inside thick leather sandals, begin to blister. The blisters form, burst, and fill with gray road dust, until your soles are leathered, cracked, and numb. The heat of midday in Asia Minor is oppressive. The sun sits heavy on your head like a brass plate. Your wicker shield, which felt so light at Susa, now feels like a slab of oak dragging down your left shoulder. The strap cuts into your collarbone, wearing away the skin until the cloth of your tunic sticks to raw wounds. Water is strictly rationed. Each unit carries leather water skins on baggage mules that trudge in the center of the column. But the water, by afternoon, is hot, tasting of old goat grease and tannic pitch used to seal the seams. You take a small sip, holding it in your mouth to wet your swollen tongue before swallowing. By the time the army reaches Sardis, the ancient capital of Lydia, the seasons have turned. Months have passed since you left your village. You have walked over 1,000 miles. Sardis is a place of wonder, with its soaring acropolis and grand stone temples. But you do not get to enjoy the city. The army is quartered in vast sprawling camps outside the city walls. Hey, King Xerxes himself reviews the troops. You stand in your formation for 7 hours under drizzling autumn rain, holding your spear upright, your wicker shield dripping water onto your soaked sandals. High above, on a wooden platform covered in golden cloth, sits the great king. He is distant, a tiny figure in white and gold robes, wearing the tall, upright royal tiara. He sits upon a chair of carved ivory and bronze, surrounded by fan-bearers holding high peacock feathers. From where you stand, in the 42nd row of the Elamite infantry, he does not look like a god. He looks like a doll, small and motionless. Yet, at a single gesture of his hand, 10,000 officers bow, and a shout rises from hundreds of thousands of throats, a roar so loud it shakes the rain from the leaves of the olive trees. You join in the shout, not out of love, not out of loyalty, but because the officer standing 10 feet away is watching your mouth. And to stay silent in the presence of the King of Kings is to invite a blade between your ribs. In the spring of 480 BCE, the massive machine moves again, heading toward the narrow stretch of water that separates Asia from Europe, the Hellespont. This is where the true terror of the expedition begins to settle into your bones. Until now, you have been marching across lands that belong to the great king, lands where people bow, pay taxes, and speak familiar variations of imperial tongues. But beyond the water lies Europe, a cold, wild land of dense forests, fierce barbarians, and the strange, stubborn cities of the Greeks. As you approach the coastal town of Abydos, the sound of the sea reaches you long before you see the water. A salt wind, cold and damp, whips through your thin tunic. And then, you see it, the Great Bridge. Two vast, floating pathways constructed across the swirling, treacherous currents of the Hellespont. Over 600 triremes and heavy merchant ships, tied together side by side with thick, heavy cables woven from flax and Egyptian papyrus. Planks of oak and pine have been laid across the decks, covered with brushwood and packed earth so the horses will not panic at the sight of the dark water beneath. High walls of woven brush have been built along the edges of the bridge, so the animals cannot see the churning waves. It is a marvel of human engineering, a defiant attempt to master the sea itself. Yet, you remember what happened only months before. The first bridge, built by Phoenician and Egyptian engineers, was destroyed by a sudden, violent storm that ripped the cables apart and smashed the ships against the rocky shore. When King Xerxes learned of the sea's defiance, his wrath was absolute. He ordered the sea itself to be punished. Scribes and officers were sent down to the water's edge with iron whips, striking the foam 300 times, while shouting, "O bitter water, our master inflicts this punishment upon you because you have injured him though he never injured you." They even dropped iron fetters into the sea to symbolize its enslavement to the king. To a simple farmer from the inland plains, this act was terrifying. To whip the sea, to command the tides as if they were slaves, was to challenge the ancient gods of the deep water. As you step onto the floating wooden bridge, you feel the ground move beneath your feet. Up, down, up, down. The giant wooden hulls creak and groan like dying animals as the powerful current pulls at the thick ropes. Water sprays over the side walls, landing on your face. Cold and salty, you hold your breath, your knuckles white as you grip your wicker shield, convinced that at any moment, the insulted sea god will rise up, snap the ropes, and drag all 300,000 of you into the dark, bottomless abyss. It takes 7 days and 7 nights for the army to cross. 7 days of endless, marching footsteps echoing over the wooden planks. When your feet finally touch solid ground on the European shore at Abydos, you do not feel relief. You turn and look back across the blue water. Asia, your home, your fields, your family, lie on the other side, separated from you by a mile of deep, dark sea. You are in Thrace now, a land of alien mountains, dark pine forests, and strange, howling winds. You are further from home than anyone in your village has ever been in the history of the world. And as you look ahead at the dark, misty hills rising toward the west, you know in your heart that the road only gets narrower from here. You have stepped onto a continent that does not want you. The soil beneath your worn leather sandals feels different here in Thrace. Darker, colder, dampened by early morning mists that roll off the Aegean Sea like ghostly fingers. Back home in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, or across the sun-baked stones of Susa, the earth smelled of dried clay, river mud, and sweet summer straw. But here, the air is thick with the resinous, heavy tang of wild pine, rotting oak leaves, and the sharp, salt breeze of an unfamiliar sea. You look back over your shoulder one last time toward the narrow turquoise ribbon of the Hellespont, but the hills behind you have already swallowed the sight of the pontoon bridges. The vast army of Xerxes moves forward like a giant, slow-crawling beast. A mountain of iron, wicker, bronze, and bone, stretching across the horizon in a thick line that seems to have no beginning and no end. You are surrounded by thousands of men whose faces you do not know, whose languages sound like the chattering of birds or the dry scraping of locust wings. And with every mile you march northward along the Thracian coast, the comfort of your home recedes further into memory, becoming nothing more than a faint, painful dream. The logistical reality of keeping 300,000 men alive on a dirt path in Europe is a slow, daily miracle of bureaucratic cruelty. Behind the marching columns of infantry comes the baggage train, an endless, rumbling procession of wooden ox carts, pack mules, donkeys, and thousands of Bactrian camels. Their heavy wooden axles screech and groan without grease, creating a piercing, rhythmic whine that echoes off the granite cliffs. Screech, clack, screech, clack, a sound that burrows into your skull until you hear it even in your fitful sleep. The dust raised by this monster is different from the light sand of Asia. It is a heavy, red clay dust that clings to your damp tunic, sticking to your skin like a second layer of clothing. It settles into the corners of your eyes, forming hard, painful crusts by midday. Your mouth feels perpetually coated in dry copper, and when you spit, the saliva is a thick, dark orange paste. The imperial officers riding alongside the column do not care about your discomfort. Their job is not decay. Their job is distance, to ensure that your unit covers 4 parasangs before the sun touches the treetops. No matter how many men drop by the roadside, as you march deeper into the wild interior of Thrace, you begin to notice figures watching you from the high, rocky crags above the road. The Thracian tribesmen. Wild, fierce people with blue tattoos carved into their cheeks and forearms, wrapped in heavy coats of striped wool and foxskin caps. They do not attack the main column. Even a fool knows better than to throw himself against a forest of 300,000 spears. But they hover on the margins like wolves waiting for a sick day. If a soldier straggles 30 paces behind to adjust a broken sandal strap or relieve his aching bowels in the bushes, he disappears. There is no shout, no dramatic clash of steel, merely a rustle of pine branches, a sharp, wet gasp. And when the rear guard passes 5 minutes later, there's only a patch of flattened fern and a smear of fresh blood on a lichen-covered rock. You quickly learn the golden rule of survival in the great king's army. You never step out of line. You keep your eyes fixed on the dainty woolen tunic of the man ahead of you. And you keep walking, no matter how badly your ankles throb. before the army reaches a town or district. Royal heralds ride days ahead, carrying golden bowls and imperial banners. They enter the local settlements and deliver the demand of the King of Kings. Yield unto the great King earth and water, and prepare a feast for his coming. For the small Greek cities along the Thracian coast, cities like Dariscus, Acanthus, and Thasos, this demand is a sentence of absolute financial ruin. To feed King Xerxes, his royal court, his 10,000 immortals, his cavalry, and the endless sea of levies for a single evening, requires the total exhaustion of a city's wealth accumulated over 3 generations. The citizens spend months grinding every grain of wheat in their granaries, slaughtering every prize bull, goat, and pig in their pastures. Fatted sheep are gathered by the thousands, and golden and silver goblets are crafted specifically for the royal table. Goblets that the king's attendants quietly pack into supply chests the moment the meal is finished, never to be seen by their owners again. Herodotus, that great recorder of ancient gossip, noted dryly that a citizen of Abdera named Megacreon once advised his fellow townsfolk to go to their temples in full procession, throw themselves on the floor, and thank the gods that King Xerxes was in the habit of eating only 1 meal a day. For if he had demanded breakfast as well as dinner, Abdera would have been completely erased from the face of the earth. But you, the humble Levi from Susa or Babylonia, do not sit at the royal table. You do not drink wine from silver goblets or taste the roasted meat of fatted oxen, while the great king dines under a grand pavilion of purple silk, smelling of frankincense and burning cedar. You and your tent mates are sitting a mile away in the damp grass, huddled around a small fire fed by wet pine cones and horse dung. You break off a piece of your daily ration, a hard, stale cake of barley meal that has absorbed the smell of your damp canvas bundle, and chew it slowly, washing it down with water that smells faintly of sulfur and wet leather skin. It is during the march through the mountain passes near the river Nestos that the army encounters an enemy that no strategist had planned for. The land here is wild, primitive, and thick with thickets. And as night falls, strange, heavy shadows move through the trees around the camel lines. Lions, ancient European mountain lions, driven down from the high peaks by the noise and scent of thousands of animals. They do not attack the infantry lines, perhaps frightened by the scent of so many men and the smoke of the campfires, but they develop a terrifying, unnatural appetite for the Bactrian camels. Every night, as the camp sleeps in deep, exhausted silence, a sudden, horrific scream pierces the dark. The high-pitched, gargling screech of a camel being dragged down into the brush by 200 pounds of muscle, claw, and golden fur. The camel handlers panic, waving torches and throwing wooden spears into the dark. But the lions are silent, lethal phantoms, leaving behind only bloody bones and crushed wicker baskets scattered in the morning dew. For you, the soldier, these nightly lion attacks add a layer of psychological dread to an already miserable existence. You lie in your small wool blanket, staring up at the strange European skies through the canopy of leaves, listening to every snap of a twig, every rustle of dry ferns. Your hand grips the smooth ash shaft of your spade. But you know in your heart that a 6-foot stick tipped with a tiny bronze point is small comfort against a beast that can snap a camel's neck with a single blow. Sleep becomes a luxury you cannot afford. You drift off for 20 minutes, only to wake shuddering as a cold mountain wind blows through the trees, whistling through the woven reeds of your wicker shield resting beside your head. The shield seems to whisper to you in the dark, reminding you of its flimsiness, reminding you that you are thousands of leagues from home, surrounded by wild beasts, strange gods, and hostile mountains. By the second month in Thrace, A far more silent and deadly killer takes hold of the column. Disease. When 300,000 men, along with tens of thousands of horses, mules, and camels, march along a single dirt track with no concept of modern sanitation, the earth itself becomes poisoned. Dysentery, the great killer of armies throughout human history, spreads through the ranks like wildfire. It begins with a dull ache in your lower abdomen, a cold, twisting cramp that leaves you doubled over in the date. Within hours, your bowels turn to water. You are forced to fall out of the column every 20 minutes, staggering into the tall weeds by the road, shivering uncontrollably despite the summer heat. The imperial officers no longer even bother to whip the men who fall out from sickness. There are simply too many. The roadside becomes lined with ghostly figures, sitting in their own filth, eyes hollow and sunken, lips cracked and black with thirst, waiting for the crows or the Thracian wolves to finish them. If your tent mate falls ill, there is nothing you can do for him. There are no field hospitals, no army doctors carrying medicine for ordinary levies. The royal physicians are reserved exclusively for the king, his noble Persian commanders, and the immortals. If your friend cannot walk, you must leave him. You take his remaining water skin, his pouch of salt fish, and perhaps his sandals if yours are worn through to the skin. You do not look back into his eyes as he reaches out a trembling, mud-stained hand toward your tunic. You cannot. To look into his eyes would be to accept that his fate will be yours in 3 days' time. You turn your head, step back into the dusty rhythm of the marching column, and listen to the monotonous thump, 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 of thousands of leather soles hitting the hard clay. As the army reaches the crossing of the Strymon River, at a place known as the Nine Ways, near the future site of Amphipolis, the atmosphere grows dark with ancient religious terror. The river is wide, deep, and dark, churning with swift mountain snowmelt. The Persian magi, the sacred priests who travel with the king in white robes carrying bundled twigs of tamarisk, gather on the riverbank to perform sacrifices. They slaughter white horses, letting their hot blood drain into the swirling blue water to appease the local river gods. But for King Xerxes, horse blood is not enough to secure the safety of his grand army as it enters the heart of Greece. The king demands a darker, more ancient rite. The Magi select 9 young boys and 9 young girls from the local Thracian population. They dig deep pits in the soft river mud. And there, on a bright, sunny afternoon, they bury the 18 children alive, covering them with heavy earth while the army marches past in absolute, stone-cold silence. You march past the newly filled mounds of earth by the riverbank. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. You are a religious man. Back in your village, you offered small clay figurines to the local gods of fertility and water, hoping for good rain and healthy barley crops. To see such dark, terrifying magic performed on the orders of your king fills your soul with a deep, creeping coldness. You realize that the world you have entered is governed by rules that defy human reason. In this grand campaign, life is not merely cheap. It is a currency to be spent in thousands, thrown into riverbeds, buried in mud, or driven against bronze spears to satisfy the endless, hungry ego of a ruler who considers himself higher than the mountains. The army leaves Thrace behind and enters Macedonia, a land of broad valleys, blue lakes, and towering mountain ranges that seem to touch the sky. King Alexander I of Macedon, an ancestor of the great conqueror who would march the opposite direction 2 centuries later, realizes he has no choice. He comes out to meet Xerxes, offering gifts of gold, horses, and silver, bowing his head and giving earth and water. Macedonia becomes a vassal, and its fierce mountain soldiers are forced to join the marching columns. Now, beside you, walk Macedonian foot soldiers, men with yellow hair and heavy leather caps, who stare at you with cold, clear blue eyes. They do not like you. You do not like them. Yet here you are, bound together by the same invisible rope, marching south toward the land of the southern Greeks. Along the coast, whenever the road hugs the edge of the Aegean Sea, you can see the imperial fleet sailing in parallel with the army. Hundreds upon hundreds of triremes, sleek, dark wooden warships with 3 banks of oars dipping into the blue water like the legs of giant water insects. Their sails, painted red, white, and dark blue, catch the coastal breeze. Beside the warships are thousands of heavy transport vessels, carrying grain, extra spears, siege engines, and timber. Seeing the fleet gives you a fleeting sense of security. As long as those ships are out there, you know that somewhere ahead, there are supply depots waiting for you at places like Therma. But you also know that the sea in this part of the world is treacherous, unpredictable, and subject to sudden, violent gales that blow down from the northern peaks of Mount Olympus. The weather, which had been warm and dry during the early summer, begins to change as the army enters late July. The heat becomes suffocating, stagnant, trapped in the deep granite valleys of Thessaly. Sudden, violent thunderstorms erupt without warning in the late afternoon. The sky turns the color of a bruised plum. Lightning flashes across the peaks, and rain pours down in relentless sheet-like torrents. Within minutes, the dry dirt road transforms into a river of red, slick mud. Sandals are pulled off feet by the suction of the clay. Leather straps swell and stretch until your shield sags uselessly against your leg. Your wicker shield, that woven basket of dried reeds, absorbs the moisture like a sponge, growing twice as heavy while softening until it feels like wet paper. You carry it like a dead weight, cold water dripping from its bottom edge onto your bruised shins. Finally, after 4 months of continuous marching, after crossing over 1,000 miles of mountains, rivers, and wild forests, the army reaches the Gulf of Therma, modern Thessaloniki. Here, the column halts for 3 days to regroup and resupply. You walk to the edge of the camp, standing on a grassy headland looking south across the glittering blue waters of the bay. And there, rising out of the sea in towering, majestic grandeur, is Mount Olympus. Its snow-capped peaks glint in the clear summer light, draped in soft, white clouds. To the Greeks, this is the home of the gods, the seat of Zeus, the thunder hurler, and his divine court. To you, it is simply a mountain, higher and steeper than anything you saw in Thrace. But its presence is cold, imposing, and strangely silent. In the camp, whispers begin to spread among the soldiers. Whispered in Elamite, Babylonia, Scythian, and Old Persian. The heralds who were sent ahead to the southern cities of Greece have retained. Many cities, Thessaly, Boeotia, Thebes, have submitted. Terrified by the sheer size of the great king's army, they have given earth and water, opening their gates and promising supplies. But down in the south, beyond the mountains, 2 cities have refused. Athens, a city of sailors and craftsmen who burned the Persian city of Sardis 20 years before. And Sparta, a city of strange, disciplined warriors who do nothing but train for war from the age of 7. Men who do not wear linen tunics or wicker shields, but cover themselves in heavy bronze armor, carrying 6-pound shields of solid oak faced with brass, and 8-foot spears of tough ash. You look down at your hands, rough, blistered, and calloused from holding a spear and walking through mud for 4 months. You look at your flimsy wicker shield, leaning against a wooden tent peg. Its reeds frayed at the bottom where you dropped it in the mud near the Strymon. You have survived the march across Asia Minor. You have survived the terrifying crossing of the Hellespont. You have survived the lions of Thrace, the poisoned water, the dysentery, and the torrential summer rains. But as you sit by your small fire, watching the sunset turn the snowy peaks of Mount Olympus into a deep, blood-red rose, you realize the most terrifying truth of all. Everything you have suffered so far, the 1,000 miles of dust and misery, was merely the march to get here. The battle, the actual meeting with the bronze men of the South, has not even begun. Imagine the road continuing its relentless push southward, winding like a bruised, dust-caked ribbon through the rugged timberlands of Thessaly, where the pine trees give way to ancient, gnarled olive groves whose leaves shimmer like beaten silver whenever the coastal breeze catches them. You have left behind the flat, broad agricultural plains of the north, and the earth beneath your worn leather sandals begins to contract, squeezing inward, rising into towering, jagged limestone cliffs that seem to push the marching columns closer and closer to the blue waters of the Malian Gulf. The air is changing again, no longer crisp with mountain freshness, but thick, heavy, and sodden with coastal humidity, smelling of damp salt, decaying sea wrack, and a strange, pungent warmth that rises from the rocky soil. As you round a sharp, rocky headland near the small settlement of Thrace, a strange, sulphurous vapor meets your nostrils. Sharp, acidic, and yellow, smelling faintly of rotten eggs, wet ash, and subterranean furnace. This is Thermopylae, the famous hot gates, named for the natural hot springs that spout up from deep within the earth, bubbling out from fissures in the dark granite cliff face and trickling into steaming, green-tinted pools before running down across the road into the coastal reed marshes. To a humble farmer from the alluvial plains of Susa, where water is either sweet river silt or clear well water, these boiling, stinking pools feel uncanny, deeply unnatural, as if the dark underworld itself is leaking out onto the dirt road. The terrain here is a geographic bottle, a cruel trick played by the geography of Greece. To your right, rising sheer, black, and broken toward the heavens, are the impenetrable cliffs of Mount Calidromos, soaring so steeply that their pine-forested crests are frequently shrouded in heavy, gray rain clouds. To your left, only a few dozen yards away, lie the soft, treacherous mudflats and deep salt water of the Malian Gulf, and between the mountain and the sea lies the track, a narrow, stone-paved bottleneck that, at its narrowest points, is barely wide enough for 2 wooden ox carts to pass side by side without grinding their wheels. An army of 300,000 men, an entire empire on the march, finds itself funneled into a single, vulnerable thread, in the broad, flat basin of Thrace, just outside the northern entrance of the narrow pass. The imperial camp is pitched once again, but hey, cramped between the base of the cliffs and the salt marsh, the vast tent city feels uncomfortably dense, claustrophobic, and unnervingly quiet. The great king's pavilion, framed in gilded cedar and draped in heavy purple wool from Tyre, is erected on a high, grassy knoll overlooking the entire bay. From his elevated golden chair, King Xerxes can look down upon his vast sea of tents, and directly into the dark, silent gap of the narrow pass ahead. He sits in regal confidence, surrounded by his court eunuchs, his scribes writing on clay tablets, and his Greek advisors, convinced that no force on earth can withstand the sheer weight of his majesty. On the morning after the army's arrival, Xerxes sends forward a single-mounted scout, a median horseman riding a sleek, silver-gray Nicaean stallion, to ride close to the mouth of the pass and observe the enemy positions. The scout trots his horse along the stony coastal path, his leather bridle jingling soft in the damp morning air. Stopping just out of bowshot, he expects to see a chaotic, terrified mob of rustic Greek farmers, digging defensive trenches in panic or weeping in despair at the sight of the imperial host covering the plain. Instead, what he sees through the thin coastal sea fog leaves him utterly bewildered. The pass is blocked by an ancient, low stone wall, half ruined by age, but recently repaired with rough field stones and dried mud. Standing in front of this wall, completely unfazed by the presence of the Persian scout, are a few hundred men. They are not digging trenches. They are not praying to the sky. And they are certainly not preparing to run. Some of these men are stripped entirely naked under the morning sun, casually running foot races and wrestling in the dry road dirt. Others are sitting calmly on boulders, carefully combing out long, thick tresses of dark hair with bone combs, polishing their heavy bronze shields with greasy rags, and chanting slow, rhythmic cadence songs. The scout turns his stallion and gallops back to the royal pavilion to deliver his report. Xerxes listens, and bursts into a short, incredulous laugh, genuine amusement in his eyes. He turns to Demaratus, an exiled king of Sparta who lives in the king's retinue as a political advisor, and asks why these foolish barbarians are behaving like vain, silly women preparing for a bathhouse festival on the eve of their total destruction. Demaratus does not laugh. He looks down at his leather sandals, his face grim, and speaks softly. "O king, these are the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans. It is their custom to dress their hair and polish their brass when they are preparing to die where they stand. They will not run. You are facing the deadliest men in Greece." Xerxes, convinced that Demaratus is merely playing the fool or exaggerating the courage of his countrymen, refuses to order an immediate attack. He waits. 1 day passes, then 2, then 3, then 4. The great king sits on his high throne, expecting that as the sun rises and sets, and as the Greeks look out upon the endless forest of Persian banners and spears covering the plain below, their fragile courage will melt away and they will slip quietly into the dark hills under cover of night. But inside the camp, for you, the humble foot soldier, these 4 days of waiting are slow, grinding torture of the mind. You sit in the muggy, sulphurous heat of the marshland, watching the white steam curl up from the hot springs, feeling the damp salt air corrode the sharp iron tip of your spear. Rumors sweep through the campfires, whispered in Elamite, Akkadian, Scythian, and Old Persian. They say the enemy holding the pass numbers no more than 7,000 men in total, with only 300 of these fanatical, long-haired Spartans at their core. To an infantryman from Babylonia or Susa, 7,000 men sounds like a tiny town, an insignificant bump in the road. Yet, when you walk to the edge of the camp and look at the narrow throat of the pass, your heart shrinks. The bottleneck at the middle gate is so narrow, barely 50 feet wide from the sheer drop of the mountain cliff to the rocky edge of the sea, that the great king's immense numerical superiority is stripped away in an instant. 1 million men cannot fight at once in a space no wider than the floor of a village barn. Only 10 or 12 men can stand abreast in the front line at any single moment. The rest of the 300,000 men behind them are merely spectators, waiting in line to step forward into the exact same 50-foot gap. It does not matter how vast the empire is. At the point of contact, the battle will be fought man for man, spear for spear, and then you compare your equipment to theirs. You look down at your wicker shield. Geron, constructed of dried willow twigs woven together and stretched over with thin, cured hide. It is light, portable, designed for the vast, open plains of the Near East where light archers maneuver quickly and dry sand and fire clouds of arrows into loose ranks. You wear a soft linen tunic, leather sandals, and a padded felt cap. Your offensive weapon is a slender, 6-foot spear made of lightweight ash wood, tipped with a small, leaf-shaped bronze blade. Now, consider the Greek hoplite standing behind that low stone wall. He is an armored human fortress. His head is encased in a solid bronze Corinthian helmet that covers his entire face, leaving only 2 narrow slits for his eyes and a small T-shaped opening for his mouth, rendering him completely faceless. A terrifying creature of cold, polished metal. His torso is protected by a heavy bronze cuirass or a thick, glued linen breastplate. Linothorax, capable of stopping a dagger blade. His shins are wrapped in fitted bronze greaves, and in his right hand he grips a thick, 8-foot shaft of tough ash wood tipped with a heavy, diamond-section iron spearhead. Most devastating of all, however, is his shield, the aspis. It is a massive, bowl-shaped wooden bronze disc, 3 feet in diameter, constructed of heavy, laminated oak, rimmed with thick bronze, and faced with a gleaming layer of sheet brass. It weighs nearly 16 pounds, 3 times the weight of your entire armaments combined. When a line of hoplites stand shoulder to shoulder, interlocking their heavy oaken bronze shields edge to edge, they form a continuous, unbroken wall of metal, behind which projects an impassable forest of iron-tipped spears. You realize, with a cold, sickening clarity in the pit of your stomach, that pushing against that bronze wall with a basket of woven reeds and a 6-foot stick is like trying to break a stone fortress with a bundle of dried straw. On the afternoon of the 4th day, King Xerxes' patience finally snaps. His royal pride can tolerate no further delay from a handful of stubborn hill-dwellers. He sends his heralds through the camp, sounding the bronze trumpets. The order is given. Tomorrow morning, at first light, the pass will be cleared. The honor of taking the front line is bestowed upon the Medes and the Scythians. Proud, brave troops who wear bright embroidered tunics and short leather caps. Men whose ancestors conquered vast empires. You watch from the hillside as thousands of Median soldiers gather their wicker shields and check their spear tips, their officers shouting commands. They are confident, laughing among themselves, eager to prove to the king that these Greek barbarians can be brushed aside in less than an hour. Night falls over the camp, cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of horse manure, roasting mutton fat, and burning sulfur. You sit beside your tent mate, a quiet boy from a village 3 miles from yours back in Susa. His face is pale, hollowed by weeks of marching and dysentery. He does not speak. He simply sits on his blanket, polishing the bronze tip of his short spear over and over with a piece of greasy wool until it shines in the firelight. All around you, thousands of campfires flicker in the sea mist, illuminating rows of wicker shields leaning against tent pegs like long lines of woven tombstones. You know that if the Medes fail tomorrow, your division will be next. At dawn on the 5th day, the sky above the Malian Gulf turns the color of a bruised plum, a dark, stormy gray-purple. The signal trumpets blow, a long, mournful blast that echoes off the sheer granite walls of Mount Kalidromos. The Median vanguard, 10,000 strong, steps off, marching down the stony coastal track into the narrow mouth of the pass. Their feet make a heavy, crunching roar on the gravel. Crunch, crunch, crunch. You stand near the edge of the camp, your hand resting on your own wicker shield, watching them disappear into the swirling sea mist that fills the narrow gap. For a few minutes, there is only silence, save for the distant cry of seagulls circling over the mud flats. And then, the sound begins. It is not the sound of a grand, heroic battle as described by court poets. It is a horrible, wet, metallic noise, a thunderous crash, as 10,000 light wicker shields and linen tunics slam full force into a solid, unyielding wall of 16-pound oak and bronze. Then comes the screeching scraping of metal against metal, the frantic shouting of men trapped in a corridor, and the dull, sickening thump of heavy bronze shield bosses hitting human chests. The narrow geography works with terrible efficiency against the Medes, squeezed into the 50-foot gap. The men in front cannot maneuver, cannot retreat, and cannot dodge when a Greek hoplite steps forward, driving his heavy, iron-tipped ash spear through a wicker shield. The reed fibers shatter like dry twigs. The 8-foot spear passes effortlessly through the shield, through the linen tunic, and into the human flesh behind it. The shorter median spears, only 6 feet long, cannot even reach the Greek body behind the massive 3-foot bronze aspis. The Medes are stabbing air and metal, while the Greeks are stabbing soft, unprotected bodies. From where you stand at the edge of the camp, you begin to see the first wounded staggering back out of the mist. Men with shattered arms, men clutching stomachs punctured by thick iron spears, men whose faces have been crushed by the heavy bronze rims of Greek shields. They are babbling in terror, weeping, falling into the mud by the hot springs. The grand illusion of imperial invincibility, nurtured across thousands of miles of marching, shatters in less than 20 minutes. The Medes are being slaughtered in the narrow gap, not because they lack courage, but because they are trying to cut down an oak tree with a grass sickle. Hours pass, and the slaughter in the pass continues without pause. The Greeks employ a deadly, disciplined tactic. The front rank of hoplites fights for 15 minutes, stabbing, shoving, and holding the wall. Then, on a whistled signal from their commander, they step back in unison, while the fresh rank behind them steps forward, seamlessly maintaining the wall of metal. Meanwhile, the Median commanders, desperate to avoid the great king's wrath, keep shoving fresh waves of light infantry into the rear of the bottleneck, pushing their own men into the meat grinder. The pass becomes choked with bodies, the stone track turned slick with dark, muddy blood. By late afternoon, King Xerxes, watching from his golden chair on the hill, rises in fury and frustration. He waves his arm, recalling the broken remnants of the Medes. The survivors stagger out of the pass, exhausted, bleeding, and diminished by half. Xerxes turns to his supreme commander, Hydons, and orders forward the ultimate weapon of the Achaemenid Empire, the 10,000 immortals, the king's personal elite guard, dressed in gold-embroidered silk, scale armor, and carrying silver pomegranate spears. The men who have never known defeat. You watch as the immortals march past your unit. Their step is silent, disciplined, imposing. They do not shout. They do not boast. They step over the weeping Median wounded without looking down, entering the narrow, blood-slick mouth of the pass as the afternoon shadows stretch long and black across the Malian Gulf. You feel a brief flicker of hope in your heart. Surely, these men, the finest warriors in the known world, will break the bronze wall. Surely, by sunset, the road to Greece will be open, and this nightmare will be over. Yet, the geography of Thermopylae cares nothing for elite reputations. The immortals enter the gap, and meet the exact same wall of bronze and oak. The Spartans deploy a terrifying feinting tactic. They advance, engage the immortals for a few minutes, and then, suddenly, turn and pretend to flee in wild panic back down the pass. The immortals, seeing the enemy retreat, break their tight formation and surge forward with a triumphant shout. But the moment the immortals become scattered in the narrow corridor, the Spartans halt on a dime, spin around in perfect formation, interlock their bronze shields, and crash back into the disorganized Persian vanguard. Herodotus records that during this battle, King Xerxes, watching from his high throne, leaped up from his golden seat 3 times in sheer terror and anguish for his army, as he watched his finest, most prized warriors cut down in the narrow bottleneck like wheat before a scythe. The scale armor of the immortals, designed to deflect light arrows and slashing swords on the open plain, offers no defense against the immense thrusting force of an 8-footer spear wielded by a 200-pound Spartan hoplite pushing with his entire body weight. As dust turns into black night, the immortals fall back, leaving hundreds of their elite dead in the blood-soaked mud of the pass. The pass remains firmly in Greek hands. Not a single yard of ground has been gained. The camp falls into a cold, dead, terrifying silence, broken only by the crackle of burning pine logs and the groans of thousands of dying men in the makeshift tents. You sit by your small fire, clutching your knees to your chest, trembling in the chilly evening sea breeze. Your tent mate sits across from you, his eyes wide, hollow, and fixed on the red embers of the fire. He has seen the immortals retreat. He has seen the invincibility of the great king exposed as a lie. Tomorrow, the officers will need fresh meat for the bottleneck. Tomorrow, they will call your name, and your unit, armed with soft felt caps and wicker baskets, will be ordered to march into that narrow, blood-slick corridor of bronze. You close your eyes, listening to the dark waves of the Malian Gulf lap against the shore, knowing that you are caught in a trap from which there is no escape. The dawn of the second day at the hot gates arrives not with the triumphant blare of imperial trumpets, but with a heavy, stifling fog that rolls off the sluggish waters of the Malian Gulf, clinging to the reed beds like a damp gray shroud. Inside the camp, the atmosphere has turned sour, cold, and bitter with an unspoken, mounting dread. The proud laughter that had echoed among the Median and Sicyon tents 48 hours ago has completely vanished, replaced by the low, wet groans of thousands of severely wounded men, lying packed together on muddy straw mats, their tunics stiff with dried, blackening blood. You walk among the tent lines, holding your wicker shield like a wooden crutch to relieve the ache in your left hip. Everywhere you look, officers are shouting, pacing, and striking their leather boots with riding crops in restless frustration. King Xerxes, sitting upon his high golden throne, cannot comprehend why his imperial host, an army that drank rivers dry in Thrace and bridged the ocean at Abydos, is being held at bay by a tiny band of armored barbarians in a 50-foot gap of stone. In his growing desperation, the great king orders fresh divisions into the narrow bottleneck, sending forward the contingents of the eastern satrapies, the Sakai with their sharp, curved battle axes, the Paphlagonians wearing their braided leather helmets, and the heavy infantry of the Scythians. They are driven forward by commanders riding sleek war horses, officers who brandish long, braided whips of bull hide, cracking them over the heads of the marching levies, forcing men into the narrow pass under the threat of immediate, brutal punishment. Yet, the result of the second morning is a horrifyingly exact repetition of the first. The narrowness of the terrain acts as an unyielding equalizer, stripping away all numerical advantage. The light wicker shields of the levies continue to shatter into useless splinters under the immense, rhythmic thrusts of 8-foot Greek ash spears. The narrow stone track becomes so piled with mountains of Persian dead that the fresh waves of soldiers are forced to climb over the slippery, bleeding bodies of their own comrades, merely to reach the gleaming bronze wall of Greek shields. By early afternoon, the assault breaks down completely into utter chaos. The levies in the front ranks, realizing that stepping forward into the pass is a swift, guaranteed sentence of death, begin to shrink back, pressing their shoulders against the men behind them. The column grinds to a halt in the narrow corridor, stuck in a claustrophobic, churning mass of humanity. From the rear, Persian officers scream orders and strike the backs of the levies with whips, while from the front, the faceless bronze monsters of Sparta step forward in perfect, terrifying unison, driving their 16-pound oaken brass shields into the mob, crushing ribs, breaking bones, and thrusting their iron spear points through throats and eyes. You stand near the rear of the division, feeling the terrible wave of human panic surge back through the rank like an earthquake. You hear men weeping, calling out to ancient gods of Babylonia and Elam, gods who seem completely deaf in this strange, violent European gorge. It is at this moment of total tactical paralysis, when the great imperial enterprise threatens to dissolve into a humiliating disaster, that a man is brought into the presence of the great king. He is not a prince, nor a general, nor a priest. He is a local Greek from the district of Thrace, a man named Ephialtes, son of Eurydemus. He is dressed in the humble, coarse wool coat of a mountain goat herd, his sandals caked with mountain mud, his face weathered, sharp, and hungry. He does not come out of loyalty to Persia, nor out of hatred for his fellow Greeks. He comes for gold. He has seen the royal treasure chests being unloaded from the supply ships at the bay, heavy iron-bound trunks overflowing with golden derricks, silver bars, and precious jewels, and in exchange for a reward that would allow him to live like a lord for the rest of his life, he offers the King of Kings a secret key that will break the deadlock at Thermopylae forever. Ephialtes speaks to the royal translators, his voice a low, raspy whisper. He reveals that there is a forgotten mountain path, a narrow, treacherous track known to the local hill dwellers as the Anapia. It begins near the gorge of the river Asopos, winds steeply up through the dense, prime-val oak forests covering the flanks of Mount Kalidromos, bypasses the narrow pass of Thermopylae entirely, and descends on the other side behind the Greek positions. If a force of picked men were to climb this trail under cover of night, they could slip past the flank of the defender, emerge at dawn behind the low stone wall, and catch the Spartans in a vice of iron and bronze. Xerxes listens, his dark eyes widening with cold, predatory triumph. He does not hesitate for a second. He calls for Hydons, commander of his personal elite guard, the Immortals, and orders him to take the surviving 10,000 guard troops and follow the traitor into the mountains the moment darkness falls. As dusk settles over the Malian Gulf, turning the sky into a bruised shade of violet and dark ash, you watch the Immortals prepare for their night march. They do not carry their heavy wicker shields or long baggage bundles. They travel light, carrying only their short bows, quiver of arrows, spears, and short daggers. Their golden scale armor is wrapped in dark cloth tunics to prevent the glint of steel from catching the moonlight. They move out of the camp in total, eerie silence, stepping off the stony main road and disappearing one by one into the pitch-black shadows of the Asopos Gorge, led by the traitor Ephialtes, who trots ahead with a flickering tallow torch in his hand, looking like a mountain demon guiding lost souls into the underworld. You watch them go from the edge of your tent, feeling a strange, chilling sensation. You know that if this night trek succeeds, the battle will be over by noon tomorrow. But if it fails, if the immortals are ambushed in those dark mountain woods, the entire army will be left hopeless, stranded on the edge of Europe. The march up Mount Calidromos is a silent, agonizing ordeal of endurance. The trail is narrow, little more than a single-track path beaten down by generations of wild goats and mountain shepherds. The ground underfoot is carpeted with a thick, soft layer of dried oak leaves accumulated over centuries, mixed with loose, razor-sharp shale stones that slide under heavy leather boots. The night air, as the immortals ascend higher and higher above the sea, grows bitterly cold. The humid salt stench of the coastal marshes gives way to the sharp, crisp aroma of mountain pine, wet moss, and damp earth. Up here, far above the fires of the imperial camp, the silence is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of dry leaves under thousands of marching feet. SHRK, 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 and the heavy, ragged breathing of men climbing a mountain slope in full war gear. For the soldiers participating in this secret march, the darkness of the European mountain forest is filled with unseen, primitive terrors. The trees here are vast, ancient oaks, their thick, gnarled branches stretching out like twisted arms in the moonlight, shadowing the path in total blackness. Strange mountain night birds cry out from the high canopy. Sharp, shrieking sounds that sound like the screams of dying women. The men, despite being elite warriors of the king, grip their bowstaves tightly, jumping at every gust of wind that rustles the canopy. In the religious imagination of the Near East, high mountain forests are the domain of wild, untamed spirits, ancient wilderness gods who do not respect the decrees of the great king. Every step up the empire path feels like trespassing into a world where mortal men were never meant to walk. Just as the gray light of dawn begins to pale the eastern sky over the Aegean Sea, the vanguard of the immortals reaches the crest of the mountain ridge, near the highest point of the pass. And here, in the quiet gray dusk of morning, they encounter an unexpected obstacle. Standing guard on the ridge, hidden among the oak trees, is a detachment of 1,000 Greek hoplites from the region of Phocis. These men had been placed on the mountain by King Leonidas specifically to guard the secret empire path. The mountain air is so still, so utterly windless, that the rustling of thousands of Persian boots crunching through the deep oak leaves alerts the Phocians long before the immortals emerge from the tree line. The Greek sentries leap to their feet, shouting in alarm, strapping on their bronze helmets and grabbing their long spears in wild confusion. Hydons, the Persian commander, fears for a brief, heart-stopping moment that he has stumbled into the main force of the Spartans. He halts his line, asking the traitor Ephialtes if these are the long-haired men of Lacedaemon. Ephialtes shakes his head, confirming they are merely local Phocian levies. Hydons quickly orders his archers to step forward. In a matter of seconds, hundreds of Persian bowmen draw back their bowstrings, releasing a dense, deadly cloud of arrows into the oak trees. The Phocians, terrified by the sudden rain of iron and bronze arrowheads, break their formation, expecting a full frontal assault. They retreat up the steep slope of the mountain crest, drawing themselves up on higher ground to make a desperate stand. But Hydons does not waste a single minute pursuing them. He ignores the Phocians entirely, keeping his column on the main trail, and begins a rapid, sliding descent down the eastern flank of the mountain, dropping down behind Thermopylae like a shadow. Down in the pass of Thermopylae, during those same quiet gray hours before sunrise, the Spartan king Leonidas receives word of the betrayal. Greek scouts, running at full speed down the mountain trails through the mist. Arrive at the stone wall, breathless, sweating, and pale with terror. They report that the Phocians have been bypassed, and that 10,000 immortals are currently descending the mountain behind them. Leonidas knows that the end has arrived. The trap is closing. Within 2 hours, the pass will be completely surrounded. He calls a council of the Greek commanders, realizing that to keep the entire 7,000-man allied army in the pass would be a meaningless, wasteful massacre. He orders the contingents from the other Greek cities to retreat immediately, to fall back south and live to fight another day. Most of the allies leave, marching swiftly away south toward Phocis and Attica. But Leonidas himself, along with his 300 Spartan citizens, refuses to yield a single inch of ground. By the ancient laws of Sparta, a king and his warriors do not retreat. They do not surrender. They stay and die where their city places them. Alongside the 300 Spartans, 2 other groups refuse to leave. 700 men from a small city of the Spear, simple farmers who choose to die alongside the Spartans out of sheer, selfless devotion to Greece, and 400 hostages from the city of Thebes. In total, barely 1,200 men remain in the narrow pass, standing behind the low stone wall, waiting for the final, catastrophic clash under the morning sun. Back in the main Persian camp, as the sun climbs over the eastern sea, King Xerxes pours a libation of wine onto the earth to honor the sun god Mithra. He waits until mid-morning, giving Hydines and the immortals enough time to descend the mountain and reach the rear of the pass. Then, at the 10th hour of the morning, the golden trumpets blow the general advance. This time, you, the infantry Levi from Susa, are in the front line. You stand in the long column, holding your wicker shield, your knuckles white, your teeth chattering despite the rising morning heat. Behind your ranks stand the Persian officers, holding their bull-hide whips, their faces cold and merciless. You know there is no turning back. If you step forward, the bronze spears of the Greeks wait for you. If you step back, the whip and the officer's short sword will cut you down on the spot. The trumpet blast sounds, and the massive column moves forward. Thump, thump, thump. But on this third day, the battle in the pass takes on a terrifying, desperate character. Leonidas, knowing that he and his men are already dead, does not wait behind the low stone wall. He orders his men to march out of the narrow bottleneck, stepping out into the wider part of the pass near the hot springs, to maximize the slaughter before the end comes. The Greeks advance in a tight, gleaming phalanx of oak and bronze, like a living machine of death. They do not care about defensive survival anymore. They care only about taking as many imperial lives with them into the dark house of Hades as humanly possible. The collision of the 2 armies on this third morning is the most violent, bloody, and chaotic spectacle of the entire campaign. The Greeks surge forward like a tidal wave of brass and iron, crashing into the front ranks of the Persian levies. The wicker shields offer no resistance. They are pulverized under the immense weight of the hoplite charge. Levies are shoved backward by the dozens, tumbling off the stony path into the deep, sulphurous mud of the salt marshes, or falling into the churning ocean waves where they drown under the weight of their own wet equipment. The Persian officers, fanatical and desperate, push men from behind, shoving fresh levies directly onto the tips of Greek spears. The pass becomes a screaming, churning cauldron of blood, mud, crushed wicker, and dying men. You are swept forward in the mass, your heart hammering so wildly against your ribs that you can barely breathe. You see a Spartan hoplite 5 paces ahead of you. His bronze Corinthian helmet is covered in blood. His red wool tunic soaked black at the shoulders. He drives his thickish spear into the chest of a man standing right beside you. The spearhead pierces the man's leather tunic, coming out his back with a wet, tearing crunch. The soldier collapses without a sound, his fingers twitching in the red mud. The Spartan steps forward, planting his heavy bronze greave on the fallen man's stomach to wrench his spearhead free. You raise your light wooden spear, your arm trembling so violently you can barely aim. But before you can thrust, the Spartan's heavy oak shield slams into your chest like a falling stone wall. The force of the blow knocks the breath completely out of your lungs, sending you flying backward into the date. Your wicker shield flies from your grip, splintering into pieces under the boots of the marching column. You lie in the mud, gasping for air, your vision turning black at the edges. Above you, the battle rages on with unmitigated ferocity. During this frantic, horrific melee, King Leonidas himself is struck down, shot by a Persian arrow and run through by a spear. The moment the Spartan king falls, a monstrous, desperate struggle erupts over his body. The Spartans charge forward with wild, suicidal fury, beating back the Persian vanguard 4 times to protect the corpse of their king. 2 brothers of King Xerxes, princes of the royal Achaemenid bloodline, are killed in this frantic tug-of-war, cut down in the red mud alongside hundreds of ordinary levies. And then, from the southern end of the pass, a loud, triumphant shout echoes off the granite cliffs. Hydines and the Immortals have arrived. They have descended the mountain path and are now blocking the southern exit. The encirclement is complete. The surviving Greeks, realizing that they are now surrounded on all sides, pull back from the open ground, carrying the body of Leonidas. The remaining Spartans and Thespians retreat to a small, rocky hillock behind the low stone wall. Near the entrance of the pass, they draw themselves up into a tight, dense circle on top of the knoll. Most of their iron spears are now broken, snapped off in the bodies of Persian soldiers. They draw their short bronze swords, and when their swords break, they fight with their bare hands, their teeth, and their rocks. King Xerxes, watching from a safe distance, sees the remaining Spartans clustered on the hillock like cornered mountain lions. He realizes that to send more infantry against these fanatical, dying men in hand-to-hand combat would only cost him hundreds more precious Persian lives. He calls back his hand-to-hand troops, stepping you and the remaining levies out of range. Instead, he orders forward his imperial archers. Thousands of archers form a vast circle around the rocky mound. They draw their composite horns bows back to their ears, and on a single command, they unleash wave after wave of bronze-tipped arrows into the sky. The sky above the hot gates turns dark, literally obscured by a thick, whistling cloud of metal and feathers. Piercing bronze shields, leather tunics, bare shoulders, and helmets. The Spartans and Thespians do not run. They do not cry out. They stand shoulder to shoulder, taking the cloud of iron into their bodies, until every single man on that rocky mound is dead, pinned to the earth under a carpet of black-feathered arrows. And then, suddenly, silence descends upon the pass of Thermopylae. A heavy, unnatural, suffocating silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of the sea waves against the salt marshes, and the high, lonely cry of a mountain eagle circling in the clear blue sky above Mount Calidromos. You push yourself up from the bloody mud, your body bruised, shaking, and covered in filth. You look around the pass. The ground is covered in a dense carpet of human wreckage. Over 20,000 Persian soldiers lie dead or dying in the narrow corridor and the surrounding marshes. 20,000 men, sacrificed to clear a 50-foot gap of stone. King Xerxes walks through the battlefield, surrounded by his golden guard. He finds the body of King Leonidas among the heap on the mound, in a rare, blind fit of rage and uncharacteristic cruelty. Xerxes orders the Spartan king's head to be cut off and impaled on a wooden stake for all the army to see. You stand by the edge of the sea water, washing the sticky red mud from your face and hands. The pass of Thermopylae is finally open. The road to southern Greece, to Attica and Athens, lies clear before the great king. Yet, as you look at the thousands of wicker shields floating uselessly in the blue waters of the Malian Gulf, you feel no joy, no sense of victory. You realize that 300 men in bronze armor held the entire power of the empire at bay for 3 days, and that for every step forward your army takes into this cold, stony land, the price in human blood will be paid not by the king on his golden chair, but by simple men like you, holding wicker baskets in a world of iron. The bottleneck of Thermopylae is left behind, but its dark, bloody ghost follows your marching column like an unwelcome shadow. As the vast army of King Xerxes spills out of the narrow granite pass into the rolling countryside of Phocis and Boeotia, the land opens up into broad, sun-baked valleys framed by distant, purple-hued mountain ranges. Yet, there is no beauty to be found in this new landscape, only the harsh, blackened scars of deliberate imperial desolation. The order has been given by the royal generals. Any city, any village, any sanctuary that refused to give earth and water to the great king is to be put to the torch, reduced to cinders and ash. You march down dirt roads lined not with peaceful olive groves, but with smoldering stump fields, where the ancient trees have been chopped down for siege timber or burnt out of sheer spite. The air is thick, suffocating, carrying the bitter, oily stench of burning olive wood, scorched grain stores, and charred roof beams. Drifting across the road in gray, sluggish clouds that settle in your throat like wet soot. As you trek through the territory of Phocis, passing near the ruins of towns like Panopeus, Hyampolis, and Arba, you see what happens to those who dare defy the King of Kings. The towns are completely empty. Ghostly stone shells stripped of everything of value. The inhabitants have fled high into the craggy peaks of Mount Parnassus, hiding in dark caves and pine thickets, leaving behind only what they could not carry. Your division passes the great sanctuary of Apollo at Arba, a revered temple complex of carved stone and wooden columns. You watch from the road as cavalry detachments and archers swarm the sacred grounds, smashing terracotta statues, prying golden leaf from altars, and finally setting fire to the wooden roof supports. The sound of ancient oak beams cracking and collapsing into red-hot embers echoes across the valley like thunder. To the Greek levies in your division, this sacrilege fills their eyes with silent, helpless horror. But to you, the foot soldier from Susiana, it is simply another chore of empire, another fire to heat your dust-caked face as you march past. Despite the trail of destruction, the physical condition of the army grows worse with every passing league. The supply lines stretching back through Macedonia, Thrace, and across the Hellespont to Asia are fraying under their own impossible weight. The local granaries in Boeotia, which the royal scribes had counted on to feed 300,000 men, have been systematically burned or poisoned by the fleeing locals before the vanguard could arrive. Food rations dropped from a full cup of barley meal a day to a half cup, then to a handful of stale, moldy grain mixed with chaff and date. Hungry levies resort to stripping the countryside of anything remotely edible, stripping green, sour grapes from wild vines, gnawing on tough, bitter wild roots. and boiling leather scraps from broken sandals and muddy water. The green grapes and bad water trigger fresh outbreaks of violent stomach cramps and watery dysentery. Men fall out of line by the dozen, sitting under the burning August sun, clutching their sunken bellies, until the whip-bearing officers leave them behind to die in the dusty weeds. The heat of late August in central Greece is a brutal, relentless furnace. The sun hangs in a cloudless, pale blue sky like a disk of white-hot iron, reflecting off the dry, limestone rocks until the air above the road shimmers and dances with heat haze. Your woven wicker shield, battered and frayed from the fighting at Thermopylae, absorbs the sun's rays until the outer leather facing becomes hot to the touch. Your linen tunic is permanently stiff with yellow sweat stains, itching furiously against your heat-rashed skin. Water-skinned bags hung over pack mules are drained within an hour of starting the morning march, leaving men to lick the dried salt from their own forearms. When the column reaches the river Cephissus, you find it reduced to a stagnant trickle of muddy pools, green with algae and swarming with buzzing flies. Men throw themselves face down into the mud, fighting each other for a mouthful of warm, foul-tasting water that smells of rotting vegetation. By early September, the vanguard of the army crosses the mountain ridge of Cithaeron and descends into the arid plains of Attica. The final objective of the land campaign is now within reach. Athens, the city that had dared to defy Darius 20 years ago at Marathon, the city that had sent warships to burn Sardis, the city whose name has been spoken with cold, venomous hatred in the royal courts of Susa and Persepolis for a generation. As you top a low, rocky ridge covered in dry scrub pine and wild sage, you catch your first glimpse of the Attic plain stretching out toward the sparkling blue waters of the Saronic Gulf. And there, rising out of the flat plain like a giant, natural stone fortress, is the flat-top limestone plateau of the Acropolis. Its white marble temples and wooden shrines glint in the clear, harsh afternoon light. Completely exposed, isolated, and vulnerable. Yet, as the army advances across the plain and enters the outer precincts of Athens, a strange, eerie sensation takes hold of the ranks. There are no suburban garrisons, no archers on the city walls, no panicked crowds running through the olive groves. The city is completely silent. Following the advice of their cunning leader, Themistocles, the Athenians have made the radical, heartbreaking decision to evacuate their entire homeland. They have abandoned their houses, their ancestral tombs, their workshops, and their fields, fleeing aboard their wooden fleet to the nearby islands of Salamis and Aegina. As your division marches through the city gates, the wooden doors hang wide open, creaking softly in the hot coastal wind. The narrow, winding streets of stone and dried mud brick are dead, empty, deserted. You walk through the deserted agora, the great marketplace of Athens, where only days ago thousands of citizens bought olives, debated politics, and traded pottery. Now, there's only dust, abandoned clay jars lying broken on stone steps, starving pet dogs roaming the alleys in search of scraps, and the sound of your own sandals echoing off the blank stone walls. To enter enemy city without a fight should feel like a triumph, a grand victory for the great king. But to a soldier, walking through a ghost city feels unnatural, deeply unsettling. It feels as though you have marched 1,000 miles across mountains and seas, only to capture a hollow, empty shell, a trap waiting to be sprung by invisible hands. However, the city is not entirely abandoned. High above the deserted streets, perched on the steep, rocky precipice of the Acropolis, a small force of defenders has chosen to make a last, desperate stand. They are mostly elderly citizens, temple guards, and poor men who could not afford passage on the evacuation ships, along with those who interpreted the ambiguous prophecy of the Delphic oracle, that a wooden wall alone shall remain unsacked, to mean that the wooden palisade surrounding the ancient temple of Athena on the citadel would protect them. They have barricaded the steep west entrance of the rock with massive oak timbers, wooden planks, and old wagon bodies, standing on the marble ramparts, shouting insults down at the imperial scouts, and hurling heavy boulders down the steep dirt slopes whenever anyone approaches. King Xerxes, infuriated that a handful of stubborn old men on a rock are delaying his total triumph, orders his elite troops to take the position immediately. The imperial army sets up camp on the Areopagus, the Hill of Ars, a rocky outcrop directly opposite the west entrance of the Acropolis. You watch as divisions of archers step forward, setting up wooden mantlets and woven wicker screens along the rocky crest. They take tow, coarse, hemp fibers soaked in sticky pine resin and pitch, wrap it tightly around the iron tips of their arrows, set the pitch ablaze with small oil lamps, and draw their bowstrings. A continuous volley of arching, flaming arrows arcs through the dark blue sky, raining down upon the wooden palisade of the Acropolis. Within hours, the wooden wall catches fire, turning into a roaring, crackling line of orange flame and black smoke. Yet, even with their wooden wall burned to ground ash, the stubborn defenders on the summit refuse to surrender. Whenever Persian shock troops try to scramble up the steep, slippery dirt path leading to the entrance, the Greeks roll massive, carved marble drums from unfinished temple columns down the incline. The heavy stone drums bounce and crash down the slope with terrifying momentum, crushing men into bloody pulp and breaking wicker shields like dried twigs. For 2 weeks, this bizarre, miniature siege continues. A few dozen men on a rock holding off the elite forces of the largest empire on Earth. You sit in the dusty ruins of a house below the hill, chewing on dried peas, watching the marble drums crash down the hillside, marveling at the incredible, baffling stubbornness of these Greeks. Men who would rather be crushed by falling marble or burned alive than bow their heads to the ruler of Asia. The stalemate is finally broken not by frontal assault, but by stealth. A unit of Persian mountaineers, searching the shea, precipitous north face of the Acropolis rock, discovers a hidden, forgotten path. A near-vertical fissure in a limestone cliff near the shrine of Agloros. Under cover of darkness, while the defenders are focused on the burning western gate, a picked team of nimble troops climbs the sheer cliff face, digging their fingers and leather toes into tiny cracks in the stone. They reach the top unnoticed, scramble over the low marble wall, and fall upon the unsuspecting defenders from behind. The gate is thrown open, and thousands of imperial soldiers surge up the pathway, sweeping onto the summit like a dak. Unstoppable wave. What follows on top of the Acropolis is a brief, brutal act of imperial vengeance. The remaining Greek defenders, realizing the citadel has fallen, throw themselves off the high cliffs to their deaths on the rocks below, or are cut down where they stand near the altars. The imperial troops, driven by weeks of built-up frustration and explicit orders from the king, plunder the sacred treasures, smashing the ancient wooden statues of Athena, stripping gold vessels from the shrines, and setting fire to every building on the rock. The old temple of Athena, the predecessor to the Parthenon, built of limestone and wood, is engulfed in towering flames. The intense heat causes the marble statues and columns to crack and burst with loud, gunshot-like reports, sending showers of white stone splinters and red sparks high into the night sky. By morning, a heavy, dark cloud of soot hangs over the ruins of Athens. The sky is not blue, but a sickly, Rue's shade of gray and amber. High wind from the sea picks up the light white ash from the burnt temples and wooden houses, carrying it across the entire Attic plain. It rains ash over the military camps. Fine, dry gray flakes that fall continuously like ghostly winter snow, settling on your hair, your shoulders, your wicker shield, and into your water cup. You step through the ruined streets, your leather sandals crunching on calcified marble bits and burnt roof tiles. Everywhere you look, there's destruction. The great city of Athens has been erased, reduced to a smoldering, blackened field of rubble. On the highest terrace of the ruined Acropolis, amid the smoldering remains of the ancient sanctuary, King Xerxes dictates a royal dispatch to his scribes. Fast messengers are dispatched on sleek horses, riding day and night along the royal road across Europe and Asia, carrying the glorious news back to the royal capital of Susa. Athens has fallen. The sacrilege of Sardis has been avenged. The King of Kings sits triumphant upon the citadel of his greatest enemy. The court rejoices. Gold coins are distributed to the officers, and a grand feast of roasted meat and imported wine is held under purple tents erected right next to the smoking ruins of the Greek altars. From his high seat, Xerxes looks down upon the burning city, convinced that the war is over, that the spirit of Greece has been utterly broken. Yet, as you stand near the base of the Acropolis rock, wiping the gray ash from your eyes, you turn your gaze toward the west, toward the blue waters of the Saronic Gulf. Just a few miles across the narrow, glittering strait, lies the mountainous island of Salamis, and there, clearly visible even to the naked eye, is the entire Athenian fleet. Hundreds of sleek, dark wooden triremes, anchored in tight formation, their painted eyes staring across the water toward the burning city. They have not surrendered. They have not begged for mercy. They are waiting, floating on the blue sea like a fleet of dark sea monsters. And you realize, with a cold, hollow knot forming in your gut, that burning the stone houses of Athens meant nothing, as long as those bronze-ramped ships remain afloat on the water. The great king does not own this land, and your journey back to the river banks of Susiana has never been further away. You stand on the steep, stony slopes of Mount Aegaleo, your bare calves scratched by wild thyme and low cedar bushes, looking down from the gray limestone cliffs onto the narrow, turquoise mirror of the Strait of Salamis. Above you, on a broad, carved marble ledge jutting out from the hillside like a theater balcony, stands the golden throne of King Xerxes. It has been placed there early in the morning by royal attendants, covered with cushions of dyed purple wool and sheltered by a canopy of gold-threaded silk. Around the king sit his royal scribes, holding wooden tablets coated in clean wax, silver styluses poised in their fingers, ready to record the names of captains, helmsmen, and officers who distinguish themselves in the coming naval battle, so that they may be rewarded with estates, gold chains, and high titles before the sun sets. The mood in the royal retinue is elevated, expectant, almost festive. The land campaign may have been delayed by 3 days at Thermopylae, but hey, on the water, the great king's navy numbers over 1,200 warships, outnumbering the trapped Greek fleet by 3 to 1. To the court, this morning is not to be a battle, but an execution. You, the infantry levi from Susiana, have been ordered up the slopes of Aegaleo along with thousands of other foot soldiers, not to fight, but to act as a human wall, guarding the king's path, and watching the spectacle unfold below. From your elevated vantage point, the view of the Saronic Gulf is breathtakingly clay. The water in the narrow strait, barely a mile wide between the rocky mainland of Attica and the jagged coastline of Salamis Island, is smooth as polished glass under the crisp morning sun. Below you, crammed into the narrow sea corridor, is the imperial fleet, a breathtaking, terrifying armada of three-deck triremes, Phoenicians from Sidon and Tyre with sleek cedar hulls, Cilicians with painted white eyes on their prows, Egyptians with high, rounded stands, and Ionians from the coast of Asia Minor. Their thousands of pine oars dip into the blue water in rhythmic, splashing precision, creating long lines of white foam that trail behind them like silver ribbons. Yet, as you look down at the dense mass of ships below, even a simple land farmer who knows nothing of the sea can notice something deeply wrong with the scene. The narrow strait is far too small for such a massive host of vessels. The Phoenician ships, forced into tight, crowded ranks to fit into the channel, are practically touching oars with one another. They have been rowed all night through the dark water, their oarsmen exhausted, sweating, their muscles burning, having had no rest, no food, and no water since yesterday's dusk. And there, waiting quietly in the shadowy bays and coves of Salamis Island, is the Greek fleet. Sleek, compact, dark-hulled ships, sitting motionless on the water, like hawks perched on a branch, waiting for the heavy target to stumble into the trap, just as the sun clears the eastern horizon, casting a bright, golden glare across the calm water. A sound rises from the hidden Greek ships. It is not the chaotic shouting of frightened men, nor the screech of wooden oars. It is a clay, unified, thunderous roar of human voices, singing the solemn, ancient chant of battle, the paean, dedicated to Apollo, the lord of the silver bow. O sons of the Greeks, go on, deliver your fatherland, deliver your children, your wives, the statues of your fathers' gods, and the tombs of your ancestors. Now is the struggle for all. The sound echoes off the high, white cliffs of Salamis, reverberating across the water, and carrying up the stony slopes of Mount Egaleo, terrifying in its absolute, disciplined unity. A trumpeter on the lead Athenian trireme sounds a single, long blast, and suddenly, the entire Greek fleet surges forward into the morning sun, their oars striking the sea with a single, deafening crash. What follows over the next 4 hours, watched in horrifying, slow-motion detail by 300,000 soldiers standing on the hills above, is the complete, catastrophic dismantling of the imperial navy. The narrowness of the strait, which had ruined the infantry at Thermopylae, claims the navy at Salamis, as the lead Phoenician ships try to wheel around to face the Greek attack. Their long wooden oars tangle with the oars of the Cilician vessels right behind them. Wooden oars snap like dried twigs. Crack, 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 sending splintered shafts whipping across decks, blinding and maiming the oarsmen below. Ships stall, swinging sideways in the narrow channel, presenting their soft, broadside wooden bellies to the oncoming Greek triremes. The Greek ships, shorter, lower in the water, and far more maneuverable in the cramped space, drive forward like iron battering rams. Their heavily reinforced bronze prows, shaped like the heads of wild boars or rams, smash full force into the sides of the trapped Persian vessels. The sound of timber buckling under the weight of bronze rams echoes up the mountain like splitting thunder. Crunch. Seawater rushes into the shattered hulls. Warships capsize, rolling onto their sides, their heavy masts snapping and crushing the men standing on deck. Phoenician and Egyptian sailors, wearing heavy scale armor and helmet caps, leap into the churning sea, but they cannot swim. They thrash frantically in the blue water, their heavy gear pulling them down into the cold, dark depths of the channel. From your position on Mount Aegaleo, the sea below transforms into a nightmare of human wreckage. The brilliant blue water of the strait turns a thick, dark purple, choked with thousands of floating corpses, broken timbers, torn canvas sails painted red and blue, and overturned hulls that look like the blackened rib cages of dead whales. You see Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, commanding 5 Chian warships. Realizing the battle is lost, she flees, but her path is blocked by a friendly Colindian ship. Without a second's hesitation, Artemisia orders her helmsman to ram the friendly vessel, sinking her own allies to convince the pursuing Greek captains that she is on their side. High on his throne, Xerxes sees the strike, and, believing Artemisia has sunk an enemy ship, exclaims with bitter, tragic irony, "My men have become women, and my women men." To complete the horror of the afternoon, a massacre takes place on the small, rocky island of Plataea, which sits directly in the middle of the strait. Before the battle began, King Xerxes had landed a picked force of several hundred noble Persian warriors, including members of his own extended family and elite guard, onto the islet to rescue stranded Persian sailors and slaughter any shipwrecked Greeks who washed ashore. But now, as the Persian fleet dissolves into utter panic, the Athenian general Aristides lands a force of heavy bronze-armored hoplites on Plataea, right before the eyes of King Xerxes, right before your very eyes. The Greeks surround the small islet, drive the Persian noblemen into a corner of the rocks, and slaughter every single one of them with spears and short swords. Not a single man on the island is spared. As the late afternoon sun sinks behind the mountains of Megara, turning the sky a deep blood red, the ruined remnants of the imperial fleet flee in total disarray toward the open sea. Over 200 warships destroyed, tens of thousands of skilled sailors, archers, and noble officers drowned or slaughtered. King Xerxes rises slowly from his golden throne on Mount Aegaleo. His purple robes are dust-caked, his face pale, his dark eyes fixed in a blank, glasses stare of overwhelming terror. The scribes around him have dropped their wax tablets, standing in terrified silence. The grand delusion of global empire has vanished in a single afternoon. The sea, whipped with iron chains at Abydos, has broken the king's navy. In the camp below Aegaleo that night, panic sweeps through the ranks like an infectious plague. Paranoia, cold and suffocating, grips the heart of the great king. He fears, above all else, that the victorious Greek fleet will sail immediately north to the Hellespont, cut the ropes of the floating pontoon bridges, and trap his entire army in Europe, stranded in a hostile land without sea supplies. Surrounded by fiercely independent Greeks, Xerxes calls a secret council of his generals. His supreme land commander, Mardonius, realizes the king's courage is completely shattered. Mardonius proposes a plan to save face. He will stay behind in Greece with a selected, elite land force of 300,000 troops, including the Immortals, the Medes, the Scythians, and the finest cavalry, to winter in the rich plains of Thessaly and finish the conquest next spring. But the king, along with the vast, bloated mass of infantry levies, including you, must retreat back to Asia immediately. The order to retreat is issued in the dead of night. There is no preparation, no organized distribution of rations, no time to pack proper gear. The army is simply turned around in order to march north, back the way it came, over 1,000 miles of barren, ruined earth that has already been stripped clean by their own advance weeks before. The retreat from Athens begins in late October 480 BC, and it quickly turns into one of the most horrific human death marches in ancient history. The weather, which had been warm during the summer, breaks violently. Cold, northern winds blow down from the Balkan mountains, bringing biting sleet, freezing autumn rain, and early snow flurries that turn the date roads of Boeotia and Thessaly into deep, freezing rivers of black mud. The supply system, completely broken by the loss of the fleet at Salamis, ceases to exist. There are no grain depots waiting for you, no supply ships hugging the coast. The towns you pass through have already been burned, the granaries emptied, the livestock slaughtered. Starvation sets in within the first 10 days. You march along the road, your stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot of hunger. You, and the thousands of levies marching alongside you, resort to eating anything organic along the roadside. You strip the bark off ancient oak and olive trees, chewing the bitter, fibrous green wood until your gums bleed. You dig up dry grass roots from frozen dirt with your bare fingernails. You boil leaves, weeds, and old leather scabbards in muddy water. So along with starvation comes pestilence, dysentery, plague, and ophthalmia, a severe agonizing bacterial eye infection caused by filth and malnutrition that turns the eyelids red and swollen, filling the eyes with yellow pus until men are struck completely blind. Thousands of blind soldiers, unable to see the date road, wander off into the icy brush, stumbling into ravines or falling into freezing rivers. The main column does not stop for them. Thump, thump, thump. The march continues relentlessly. If a man falls to his knees from exhaustion or fever, he stays there, sitting in the icy mud, clutching his wooden spear or his frayed wicker shield, watching his comrades march past, until his body freezes in the autumn cold. Herodotus notes, even the natural world seems to turn against the retreating army. When the column reaches the banks of the river Strymon in Thrace, at the Nine Ways, a sudden, sharp frost overnight freezes the surface of the wide, fast-flowing river, creating a thick layer of ice. Thousands of desperate, starving soldiers, eager to cross without waiting for the few wooden boats, surge onto the frozen ice in a chaotic, dense mob. But as the morning sun rises higher in the sky, its warmth softens the ice. Just as the middle of the column reaches the deepest, fastest part of the river, the ice breaks. Crack! Thousands of men, mules, and supply carts drop instantly into the roaring, ice-cold mountain current, dragged under the thick ice by their heavy clothes and spears, drowning in the dark. Finally, after 4 to 5 days of continuous, hellish marching from Athens, the broken remnant of the army reaches the coast of the Hellespont at Abydos. Out of the hundreds of thousands of levies who had marched into Europe 4 months before, only a fraction remain. Thin, emaciated, covered in lice, their skin black with dirt and frostbite. And hey, at the water's edge, the final cruelty of the journey awaits you. The grand floating pontoon bridges, the engineering marvels built by Egyptian and Phoenician craftsmen, are gone, smashed to pieces by violent autumn storms. The heavy cables snapped. The boats sunk or washed away into the Aegean Sea. The ocean has destroyed the king's path once again. The army is forced to wait on the barren shore for days, while the surviving merchant vessels of the fleet ferry man across the mile-wide strait in small, overcrowded groups. On the shore, royal supply depots have been set up carrying wheat flour and clear water. Hungry men, who have eaten nothing but grass and tree bark for 40 days, gorge themselves frantically on raw wheat flour and cold water. Their weakened, Shrunken stomachs cannot handle the sudden intake of food. Hundreds of men suffer violent stomach ruptures, dying on the sandy beach of Asia Minor, within sight of safety, their mouths still filled with unchewed grain. You, miraculously, survive the crossing. You step out of a wooden rowboat onto the dry, familiar soil of Asia. Your wicker shield is gone, dropped in the icy mud somewhere near the Strymon River. Your short spear is broken, reduced to a splintered wooden stick. Your sandals are worn through, your feet wrapped in dirty rags. You sink onto the earth, your fingers digging into the warm, dry dirt of Asia, tasting the air that smells of river silt and sweet clay. You have made it back. You have survived the march across Europe, the slaughter at Thermopylae, the ash of Athens, the blood of Salamis, and the death march through Thrace. Yet, as you lie on the earth, looking back across the grey water of the Hellespont toward the dark, misty hills of Europe, you know in your heart that the nightmare is not yet over. King Xerxes flees inland towards Sardis and Persepolis, leaving behind the destruction he wrought. But down in the south, in the rich plains of Thessaly, General Mardonius and 300,000 elite Persian troops are setting up winter camp, waiting for the snows to melt, waiting for the spring of 479 BC, when the final, catastrophic reckoning on land will take place, on the stony fields of Plataea, when the sea at Salamis turned purple with the blood of Phoenician and Egyptian sailors, and King Xerxes fled back across the Hellespont in fear of his life. You might have believed, in your simple, aching heart, that the war was over, that the great king's grand dream of conquering Greece had died on the rocks of Attica. But as you sit by a small, smoky fire in the high, cold plains of Thessaly in the winter of 480 before the Common Era, you quickly learn that empires do not let go so easily. While Xerxes took the broken levies back to Asia, he left behind the finest, most lethal core of his imperial land force, 300,000 picked men, under the command of his most ambitious, ruthless general, Mardonius. Here in Thessaly, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and sweeping, fertile plains, Mardonius spent the freezing winter months resting his horses, refitting his infantry, and preparing for final, catastrophic land assault in the coming spring. You, selected for your height, your strength, or simply because your division was deemed too valuable to throw away, were not permitted to cross back to Asia. You remained, trapped in the cold northern hills, waiting for the snows to melt. The winter in Thessaly is a slow, freezing purgatory of waiting. The cold northern wind, blowing down from the Balkan peaks, sweeps across the flat plains without mercy, cutting through your thin wool blanket like an iron knife. The mud of the camp freezes solid overnight, turning the rutted dirt tracks into sharp, jagged edges that tear through the thin leather soles of your sandals. Yet, unlike the death march through Thrace, food here is plentiful. Mardonius has seized the vast granaries of the Thessalian nobles, men who medized and gave earth and water to Persia. You receive daily rations of solid wheat bread, salt mutton, and dark wine. The hollow, sunken cheeks of autumn begin to fill out. Your muscles regain their strength, but your spirit remains heavy, dark, and burdened by an unbearable sense of impending doom. Every soldier in the camp, from the Medes in their embroidered tunics to the succor archers with their pointed caps, knows that when the spring grass grows tall enough to feed the horses, the march south will begin again. Before unleashing his army back into the south, Mardonius attempts one final, subtle play of imperial diplomacy. He knows that if he can detach the city of Athens from the Greek alliance, if he can combine the Athenian fleet with his own land army, the rest of Greece will fall without a single spear being thrown. He sends Alexander I, king of Macedon, as a royal ambassador to the Athenian refugees living in poverty on the island of Salamis. Alexander carries a grand, glittering promise directly from Mardonius. The great king will forgive all past offenses. He will rebuild every burnt temple in Attica at his own expense. He will double the territory of Athens, and he will grant the city total independence as an autonomous ally of Persia. If only they will make peace and sign a treaty with the empire. The Athenians listen to the magnificent offer in total. Icy silence. And then, Aristides, speaking on behalf of the Athenian people, delivers an answer that will echo through the centuries. He points his hand toward the morning sun rising over the sea and speaks. So long as that sun moves in its present course, we will never make peace with Xerxes. We will go forth to meet him, trusting in the help of the gods and heroes whose temples and statues he has burnt to ground ash. When King Alexander rides back into Thessaly with the Athenian refusal, Mardonius' face turns dark as a thundercloud. His diplomatic trick has failed. The time for words is over. In the spring of 479 BC, as the wild anemones bloom red across the Thessalian hills, the imperial host breaks camp and begins its march south for a second time. Once again, the army sweeps into Attica. Once again, the Athenians evacuate their city, fleeing across the water to Salamis. And once again, Mardonius occupies the empty, ghost city of Athens. But this time, there is no mercy in the heart of the Persian general. When the Athenians refuse his second offer of peace, Mardonius gives the order for total, systematic annihilation. Every stone wall that had survived the previous year's burning is pulled down with iron bars. Every surviving temple is demolished. Every olive tree within 5 leagues of the city is cut down or burned. Athens is turned into a flat, gray wasteland of broken stone, rubble, and ash. And then, hearing that a grand allied army of Peloponnesians is finally marching north from Corinth under the command of Sparta, Mardonius pulls his forces back out of Attica, retreating into the broad, flat plains of Boeotia, near the small town of Plataea. Mardonius chooses the ground at Plataea with meticulous, calculating strategic care. The terrain here consists of wide, open agricultural plains framed by the winding, muddy banks of the Asopos River. Perfect, ideal terrain for the 12,000 heavy Persian cavalrymen who formed the deadly backbone of his force. To secure his baggage, his treasures, and his retreat, Mardonius orders his troops to construct a massive, square wooden fortress on the northern bank of the Asopos River near the town of Skolos. The fort is vast, over a mile on each side, constructed from thousands of oak and pine trees cut down from the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, featuring towering wooden palisades, defensive earthworks, and heavy watchtowers. For 3 weeks, you haul heavy pine logs through the mud, your hands raw and bleeding, building the timber walls of the fort that is meant to be your sanctuary if the battle goes ill. By midsummer 479 BC, the Greek army arrives, topping the high, granite ridges of Mount Cithaeron and looking down upon the Persian camp across the plain. It is the largest single allied Greek land army ever assembled in ancient history. Over 110,000 men, including 38,000 heavily armored hoplites, led by Pausanias, the regent of Sparta, a Stane, disciplined general who wears a simple red cloak and a polished bronze Corinthian helm. The Greeks, seeing the vast Persian cavalry deployed on the flat plain below, refuse to descend onto the flat ground. They draw themselves up in a long, gleaming battle line along the rocky lower slopes of Mount Cithaeron, resting their left flank near Plataea and their right flank near the cold spring of Gargaphia. And then begins a tense, agonizing nerve war that lasts for 12 long, suffocating days. Two massive armies, totaling over 400,000 human beings, standing on opposite sides of the shallow Asopos River, staring at each other across 2 miles of open grass, neither side willing to make the first major move. Every morning, the sacred priests on both sides perform animal sacrifices to consult the gods. The Persian magi slaughter white bulls, pouring their blood onto the dry earth, while the Greek diviner, Tisamenus of Elis, slays sheep on the mountain slopes. Bizarrely, improbably, the omens on both sides yield the exact same ghostly prediction. The sacrifices promise victory to whichever army stays on the defensive, and total, bloody disaster to whichever side crosses the river and attacks first. For 12 days, you stand in your formation in the summer heat, holding your wicker shield, your tunic soaked with sweat, watching the wind wave through the dry barley fields between the two armies. The silence is heavy, oppressive, broken only by the buzzing of horseflies and the occasional sharp trumpet call from the cavalry lines. Mardonius, growing restless and frustrated by the delay, decides to use his cavalry to harass and starve the Greeks on the mountain slopes. He unleashes his premier cavalry general, Mecistius, a giant of a man, famous throughout Asia for his immense strength and beauty. Mecistius leads his cavalry charge across the river, riding a majestic, snow-white Nicean stallion with a golden bridle that clinks in the summer wind. Under his flowing purple silk tunic, Mecistius wears a coat of golden scale armor, overlapping like the scales of a golden dragon, shining dazzlingly under the midday sun. Mecistius' cavalry rides up the rocky slopes, wheeling past the Greek lines in disciplined squadrons, unleashing clouds of javelins and arrows into the dense ranks of the Megarians, shouting taunts, calling the Greeks women and cowards. The Megarians, trapped on open ground, are being cut to pieces, and scream for help. Answering the call, 300 picked Athenian archers and hoplites step forward. A furious, chaotic skirmish erupts in the dry rocks. During the melee, an Athenian archer shoots Mecistius' white stallion in the flank. The horse rears up in agony, throwing the towering general to the stony ground. Before he can rise, a group of Athenian hoplites surrounds him, stabbing at his chest with their daggers, but their bronze blades bounce off his hidden golden scale armor. Finally, an Athenian soldier notices the open eye slots of his bronze helmet, and drives a short iron dagger directly through his eye into his brain. The death of Mecistius sends a shockwave of grief through the imperial camp. The cavalry launches a frantic, suicidal charge to recover his body, and after a bloody, hand-to-hand tug-of-war, they carry his corpse back across the river to the wooden fort. The mourning in the Persian camp is loud, tragic, and uninhibited. By order of Mardonius, thousands of soldiers shave their heads, cut the manes of their horses and baggage mules, and unleash a continuous, mournful wailing that echoes off the granite cliffs of Mount Cithaeron, carrying across the entire plain of Boeotia. The men weep openly for their favorite general, but in their tears, there is also a deep, cold thread of terror. They have seen the golden scale armor pierced. They have seen another great commander die. Despite the loss of Mecistius, Mardonius presses his tactical advantage. He orders his horse archers to bypass the main Greek battle line, riding deep into the passes of Mount Cithaeron behind Pausanias' army. The Persian cavalry strikes a massive Greek supply train of 500 ox carts carrying grain and wine through the Oakheads Pass, slaughtering the drivers, burning the wagons, and driving the oxen back to the fort. Even more devastating, the Persian cavalry reaches the spring of Gargathia, the only fresh water source supporting the entire 100,000-man Greek army. The horsemen ride their steeds back and forth through the clear spring, trampling the mud, defecating in the water, and choking the source with dirt and stones until it is turned into a foul, undrinkable puddle of brown mud. Deprived of water and cut off from their supply lines, the Greek army faces total, immediate collapse without a single major battle being fought. That night, under cover of pitch darkness, Pausanias orders the entire allied Greek army to retreat 2 miles back toward the town of Plataea, to a place known as the island, where 2 small mountain streams meet, offering fresh water and protection against cavalry. However, night retreats are notoriously dangerous, as the 100,000 Greeks step back into the dark. Discipline breaks down. The center divisions, contingents from Megara, Corinth, and Epidaurus, panic. They do not fall back to the island. They flee 2 miles further back, taking refuge right outside the wooden walls of Plataea. By dawn, the Greek army is completely fractured, scattered into 3 isolated, defenseless groups across the plain. When the gray light of dawn breaks over the plain of Boeotia, Mardonius walks out to the riverbank and looks across to the mountain slopes. He rubs his eyes in disbelief. The high ridge where the Greek army had stood for 12 days is completely empty. He sees the Athenians isolated on the flat plain to the left, the Corinthians huddled near Plataea, and Pausanias with 5,300 Spartans and Tegeans standing completely alone on a low ridge to the right. Mardonius turns to his officers, his face flushed with arrogant, ecstatic triumph. He boasts that the Spartans, famed throughout the world for their courage, have fled like terrified hares in the night. He gives the command he has waited 4 months to speak. General advance. The imperial war machine surges forward in wild, undisciplined euphoria. The infantry does not even bother to form proper battle lines. They cross the Asopos River in a rushing, chaotic swarm, shouting, raising their spears, and running across the dry barley fields, eager to be in at the kill of the fleeing Greeks. You are swept along in the mass, your heart pounding against your ribs, your wicker shield bouncing against your shoulder. The infantry division of the Medes, the Sakai, and the native Persians line up opposite the isolated Spartans and Tegeans. They halt 300 paces from the Greek line, kneel down in the dry grass, and plant their heavy wicker shields, Gera, deep into the date, creating a continuous, interlocked wall of woven reeds. Behind this wicker wall, thousands of Persian archers draw their composite horn bows, reposing their arrows, and let fly. A dense, blinding cloud of iron-tipped arrows rises into the sky, curving over the plain, and raining down upon the Spartans. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Yet, on the low ridge, the Spartans do not charge. They lock their bronze shields together, crouch down under the hail of iron, and wait. Pausanias is kneeling in front of the line, performing animal sacrifices, searching for favorable omens from the gods. But the omens remain bad. The sacrifices yield no divine favor. For 30 unbearable minutes, the Spartans stand completely motionless under the shower of arrows, taking iron points into their thighs, their shoulders, and their necks, dying in silence, waiting for their commander's order. Finally, as the Tegeans, unable to endure the arrow rain any longer, break ranks and charge forward on their own, Pausanias turns his eyes toward the temple of Hera on the heights of Plataea. He raises his hands to the sky, weeping openly, and prays to the goddess to grant him a noble death. And at that exact moment, as if by divine intervention, The sacrificial entrails turned favorable. Pausanias leaps to his feet, draws his sword, and screams the command. Charge! 5,300 Spartans leap up from the dirt like lions spring from a thicket. They lower their 8-foot ash spears, lock their 16-pound bronze shields, and charge down the slope full speed into the wicker archer wall. The impact of the Spartan charge against the wicker archer line is immediate, horrific, and decisive. The wall of woven reeds, which had protected the archers for 30 minutes, vanishes in an instant under the crushing weight of bronze and oak. The Spartans slam into the native Persian infantry, and the battle devolves into a desperate, barbaric hand-to-hand brawl. Hey! On the dry field of Plataea, the true tragic heroism of the Persian soldier is revealed. The Persian troops do not lack courage. They are brave men, fiercely loyal to their king. They throw themselves forward, grabbing the long Greek spears with their bare hands, snapping the ash shafts with their muscles, drawing their short daggers, and flinging themselves against the bronze shields. But they are fighting in linen tunics against men clad in bronze plates, holding wicker baskets against 6-pound oak shields. It is courage against metal, and metal wins. In the center of the fight, riding a majestic white charger, sits General Mardonius, surrounded by his 1,000-picked royal bodyguards. Mardonius fights like a demon, wearing a gleaming suit of steel armor, pointing his sword, directing the battle. As long as Mardonius sits his white horse, the Persian troops hold their ground, fighting with savage, unyielding stubbornness. But then, a Spartan warrior named Iamnestus, spotting the conspicuous general on his white stallion, picks up a heavy, jagged fieldstone from the date. He winds up his arm, and hurls the rock with all his strength. The heavy stone strikes Mardonius full in the side of the head, crushing his helmet, breaking his skull. Mardonius drops his sword, and tumbles lifeless from his saddle into the blood-soaked barley. The moment Mardonius hits the date, the heart of the Persian army snaps. The news of his death spreads through the ranks like wildfire. The native Persians break, turning and running in wild panic back toward the Asopos River. Seeing the center dissolve, Artabazus, the second in command, who had always mistrusted Mardonius' recklessness, takes his 40,000 men and immediately marches off the field, retreating north toward the Hellespont without striking a single blow. The remaining tens of thousands of Persian infantry flee in total chaos back toward the wooden palisade fortress near Skolos, wedging themselves inside the wooden walls, jamming the gates shut in frantic, weeping terror. The Greeks pursue the fleeing army across the river, surrounding the vast wooden fortress. At first, the Spartans, who know nothing of siegecraft, are unable to breach the high pine palisades. But then, the Athenians arrive from their fight with the medizing the bands. The Athenians scale the wooden walls, digging their daggers into the pine logs, scramble over the top, and throw open the heavy wooden gates. The entire allied Greek army surges inside the cramped, timber enclosure. What follows is not a battle. It is an absolute, industrial slaughter, trapped inside a wooden square with no way to escape. Over 100,000 imperial soldiers are butchered like livestock in a pen. The ground inside the fort turns into a knee-deep swamp of red mud. Herodotus records that out of the 300,000 men Mardonius commanded, barely 3,000 survived the massacre at Plataea. You lie in the high weeds near the banks of the Asopos River, wounded, covered in red dirt, your wicker shield gone, watching the dark column of black smoke rise from the burning wooden fort into the evening sky. The noise of battle has finally faded, replaced by the high, lonely whistle of the wind blowing through the pine trees of Mount Cithaeron. On this single afternoon, on the stony fields of Boeotia, the grand expedition of the Achaemenid Empire has come to its final, brutal, absolute end. On the exact same day, across the Aegean Sea, the Greek fleet under King Xerxes destroys the remaining Persian fleet and garrison at Mycale on the coast of Ionia. The empire has not merely been repelled, it has been shattered. The darkness that settles over the plain of Boeotia on the night following the massacre at Plataea is not a soft, gentle twilight, but a heavy, suffocating blanket of cold, damp silence. The terrible roar of bronze shields crashing into wicker wall, the screaming of dying horses, the high, frantic chants of the Magi, and the thunder of stepping boots, have all dissolved into the cool autumn sea breeze. You lie motionless in the tall, blood-soaked weeds near the muddy banks of the Asopos River, holding your breath, your chest pressed flat against the damp earth, listening to the distant, rhythmic footfalls of Athenian and Spartan patrols sweeping the battlefield with torches. Their flickering orange light casts long, swaying shadows across the fields, as they run their iron spears through every dark heap of clothing lying in the grass to ensure no imperial soldier remains alive. You do not move. You do not blink. You cover your face with a handful of dark, wet mud to hide the paleness of your skin, praying to whatever ancient gods still listen in this haunted European valley, to let you become as invisible as the stones beneath your belly. When the torchlights finally fade toward the burning ruins of the wooden fortress near Skolos, you push yourself up from the earth, every joint in your body aching with a dull, throbbing agony. You have no shield. It lies shattered in the dry barley field where Mardonius fell. You have no spear, no dagger, no water skin, and your linen tunic is a torn, filthy rag stiff with sweat, mud, and dried blood. You turn your back on the south, on Plataea, on Athens, and on the dark waters of the Aegean Sea, and you begin to crawl northward into the shadowy hills. You are no longer part of a grand imperial army, no longer a proud levy of the King of Kings marching under silk banners to conquer the earth. You are an escaped ghost, a nameless, hungry fugitive in a wild, unforgiving land, where every tree might hide a Greek farmer holding a pitchfork, and every rock might shelter a wolf waiting for a week. Stumbling traveler, for 3 days and 3 nights, you walk alone through the mountain passes of Thessaly, moving only when the stars are high in the cold, black sky, and hiding in deep pine ravines or muddy badger burrows during the bright, dangerous hours of the day. You live on wild acorns, bitter pine nuts, and the cold dew you lick off oak leaves in the early morning mist. On the 4th morning, near the northern border of Thessaly, you catch up with the dust cloud of Artabazus' retreat column. 40,000 men, the only organized force to survive the disaster at Plataea, marching north at a grueling, desperate pace. They do not look like soldiers. They do not talk. They do not sing. They move in a fast, terrified silence, their eyes wide and hollow, constantly looking back over their shoulders as if expecting a wave of bronze-armored hoplites to emerge from the misty pine woods at any second. You slip into the rear ranks of the column. No one asks your name. No officer asks for your unit. In the kingdom of defeat, all men are brothers of the same silent misery. The march through Macedonia and Thrace is a second, even more brutal repetition of the autumn retreat from the year before. The local Thracian tribes, who had given earth and water when Xerxes marched south with 300,000 spears, now know that the great king's power has been broken. They descend from their granite crags like mountain hawks, attacking the flanks of the column, cutting down stragglers, stealing pack mules, and stripping the wounded of their sandals and tunics before leaving them to freeze on the stony track. Rain falls continuously. Cold, sleety rain that turns the date road into a river of liquid mud, dragging down weary feet until every step feels like lifting a block of lead. By the time the broken remnant of Artabazus' column reaches the shores of the Hellespont of Byzantium and Abydos, late in the autumn of 479 BCE, more than half of those who survived Plataea have perished along the road, felled by Thracian spears, dysentery, pneumonia, and absolute starvation. You stand on the rocky shore of Europe, looking out across the narrow, churning blue waters of the strait. Just 18 months ago, you had walked across this exact water over 2 grand floating bridges of pine and papyrus, surrounded by gold-embroidered banners, gleaming scale armor, and the triumphant sound of bullhorn trumpets. Now, there are no bridges, no banners, no trumpets, only a few battered merchant rowboats, operated by pragmatic local fishermen who demand your last silver coin or leather belt before allowing you to step onto their wooden planks. When your wooden boat scrapes against the gravel beach of the Asian shore, you fall forward onto your knees, pressing your face into the dry, sweet earth. You have left Europe behind. That cold, stony, ferocious continent that consumed over 300,000 of your countrymen, that swallowed the immortals, that burned its own capital, and that broke the divine invincibility of the great king. Yet, as you stand up and look around the quiet port town of Abydos, there are no grand celebrations, no victory parades. The royal scribes and imperial officials stationed in Asia Minor are already busy at work, busy rewriting the history of the campaign. In the official royal proclamations posted in the town squares, there is no mention of Thermopylae, no mention of the disaster at Salamis, no mention of the slaughter at Plataea, according to the official decrees of the court. King Xerxes' expedition was a glorious, complete success. Had not the great king marched across the sea, had he not burned the city of Athens to ash, had he not punished the insolent Greeks and returned home to his palaces in Susa and Persepolis laden with the sacred treasures of the Acropolis, to the royal court, the loss of 200,000 peasant levies, simple farmers from Susiana, Babylonia, Siscia, and Bactria, was not a tragedy. It was not even a loss. It was merely the expected, routine cost of imperial grandeur. The lives of ordinary men were spent like water or grain, drawn from the endless well of the king's vast dominions, and forgotten the moment the ink on the papyrus scroll was dry. You begin the long, lonely trek across the Anatolian plateau, heading southeast along the royal road toward Susiana. You do not march in formation anymore. You walk alone, or in small, quiet groups of 2 or 3 men who happen to be walking in the same direction. The vast imperial highway, which had been bustling with supply wagons, royal messengers, and marching divisions a year before, is now quiet, peaceful, and strangely empty. You sleep under ancient plane trees by the roadside, or in the corners of abandoned mud-brick caravanserais, begging for stale bread at rustic farmhouses, or trading a button of bronze for a handful of dried dates. As the weeks turn into months, the cold winds of Europe give way to the dry, familiar warmth of the Near East. The soil under your bare feet changes from red mountain clay back to the dark, fine river silt of your youth. In the early spring of 478 before the Common Era, nearly 2 full years after the imperial horsemen had unrolled the royal scroll in your village square, you top a low, sandy ridge outside Susa, and there, lying in the soft, honey-colored light of late afternoon, is your home valley. The Karen River winds like a silver ribbon through the emerald-green barley fields. The palm trees sway gently in the warm spring breeze, and the smoke from cook fires rises straight up into the clear, pale sky from the mud brick houses of your village. Everything looks exactly as it did on the day you left. The low stone wall where you stood, the reed beds by the river where the cicadas buzzed, the date road where your wife packed your small bundle of saltfish and hard bread. The world had moved on, completely indifferent to the grand, bloody drama that had unfolded across the sea. You walked down the dirt path into the village square. A few old men sitting on wooden benches near the well look up at you. Their eyes are blank, unrecognizing. You are thin as a willow reed, your hair long, matted, and streaked with gray. Your skin burned dark by sun and scarred by deep mountain frostbite. When you step through the wooden doorway of your mud brick house, your family stares at you as if looking at a ghost returned from the underworld. They had long assumed you were dead, buried in some nameless mass grave in the far-off mountains of Europe, like the 4 other men who had marched away from the village with you, none of whom ever came back. You return to your wooden plow. You plant your barley. You sell your surplus onions at the district market. You resume the simple, quiet rhythm of a life you thought you had lost forever. Yet, you are never truly the same man who left. The war has left scars in your soul that no amount of spring sunshine or river water can ever wash clean. Every time the winter wind whistles through the palm fronds outside your door, you hear the terrible, dry scraping of wicker shields breaking under bronze spears. Every time you see a bone comb or a pot of olive oil, you remember the long-haired Spartans sitting casually on boulders at Thermopylae, polishing their brass, preparing to die where they stood. And every time you look up at the bright, blue afternoon sky, you see the sun obscured by a cloud of black-feathered arrows raining down upon a rocky mound. When you look back on that colossal, tragic enterprise, you understand, with the quiet, world-weary clarity of a survivor, why an ordinary foot soldier could never truly survive a day as a levy in Xerxes' army. It was not merely the terrifying, faceless bronze monsters of Sparta or the heavy, 3-deck triremes of Athens that made survival impossible. It was the fatal, irreconcilable flaw at the very heart of the imperial war machine itself. The great king had built an army designed for the vast, dry, open plains of the Near East. An army built on speed, mobility, clouds of arrows, and light wicker armor, designed to overwhelm enemies on open ground through sheer, magnificent numerical scale. But when that vast machine was driven into the narrow granite canyons, sulphurous sea passes, and cramped maritime straits of Greece, its sheer size became its greatest curse. The wicker shields that were so light and practical across thousands of miles of marching became paper-thin illusions when pressed against 16-pound oaken brass shields. The short 6-foot ash spears were useless against 8-foot iron-tipped hoplite shafts. And above all, the ordinary foot soldier was not a professional warrior fighting for his home or his freedom. He was a conscript, torn from his fields by royal decree, driven into narrow bottlenecks by officers with bull-hide whips, sacrificed in tens of thousands to satisfy the divine ego of a ruler who viewed human lives as made dust on his sandals. Centuries would pass. Empires would rise, conquer, and crumble into ground dust. The magnificent palaces of Xerxes at Persepolis and Susa would be burned to ash by another conqueror marching from the west. The names of kings, generals, and satraps, Xerxes, Mardonius, Leonidas, Themistocles, would be written down in leather-bound history books, studied and debated by scholars across thousands of years. But you, the humble foot soldier, the man who carried the wicker basket, who drank the muddy river water, who marched 3,000 miles through dust, snow, and blood, would remain completely nameless, forgotten by the world, an invisible ghost buried beneath the quiet, wild grass of the ancient earth. And so, as the evening fire flickers out in your quiet mud-brick home, and the stars rise long and bright over the dark silhouettes of the Zagros Mountains, you close your eyes, listening to the gentle lapping of the Karen River, and you let the quiet, dark sleep settle over your weary bones. Safe at last in the silent embrace of your own land,